Good evening. I want to welcome everyone to the City of Little Rock Board of Directors agenda meeting for April the 12th, 2022. This is our opportunity to review the agenda for our former board meeting that will take place on April the 19th. First, we'll start today's meeting with acknowledging National Community Development Week with a proclamation. If Director Kevin Howard would please approach with his team or whoever he designates to come with him. I know you guys have started this week off with a number of different events and different projects you've all been working on, but also trying to time it correctly with National Community Development Week. And I'm proud to say that many of you represent national leadership within the community development industry within municipalities, and I'm very grateful. Whereas community development programs are the building blocks in every community as they ensure affordable housing, enhance community development, and provide support services. And since 1975, the Community Development Block Grant Program has provided annual funding and flexibility to local communities to provide decent, safe, and affordable housing, a suitable living environment, and economic opportunities to low and moderate income people. And whereas since 1992, the Home Investment Partnership Program has provided funding to local communities to create and preserve decent, safe, and affordable housing opportunities for low-income persons. And whereas over the past 5 years, the City of Little Rock has received a total of $8,997,434 in CDBG funds and $3,188,300 in home funds, which has made a direct impact to public infrastructure, public services, and addressing housing needs for our citizens. And whereas CDBG and home are both valuable programs that have made tremendous contributions to the visibility of housing stock, infrastructure, public services, and economic vitality of Little Rock, and whereas Little Rock, whereas the week of April 11th through the 15th has been designated as National Community Development Week by the National Community Development Association to celebrate Community Development Block Grant Program and the Home Investment Partnerships Program, and states and cities are also encouraged to prepare similar declarations. Now, therefore, I, Frank Scott Jr., Mayor of the City of Little Rock, Arkansas, do hereby proclaim April 11th through the 15th of the year 2022 as Community Development Week. Let's give our team a round of applause. Director Howard.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to recognize my staff, my awesome staff. We have to my right our Community Development Manager, Tracy Shine. Also, I have 3 supervisors that supervise other staff members. Beverly Arbor, she's responsible for our money and our planning. She's our Community Development Planner. And to my left, I have Celicia Nichols, and she's our Community Development Administrator, our Community Development Rehab Supervisor. He's not here right now. He had a death in the family, so that's Ricky Evans. So I'd like to give my staff a hand clap of applause for all their hard work. As you stated, Mayor, I do sit on the National Community Development Association National Board, as well as I am the chair of Region 6, which is Southwest Region, which includes 5 states, Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. And so we have several different conferences, national conferences around the country, as well as in the region too as well. And we have other cities that are involved in National Community Development Week. We'd like to invite you out tomorrow. We have our meet and greet tomorrow at Willie Hinton. We have Director Virgil Miller that will speak tomorrow at our meet and greet. And Virgil is very familiar with CDBG as we leverage with Arvis Bank to do a lot of projects under the SNAP Federal Home Loan Bank program as a partnership. So definitely invite you all out. We'll be providing our national community development impact book to all the directors here within the next few days, and you'll see all the projects that we have done in the city of Little Rock and around the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Howard, and we also will be in prayer for Mr. Evans' family.
Thank you.
Our next proclamation is for our public safety telecommunicators. Ms. Director Joanna Green, if you would approach the podium. Whereas emergencies can occur at any time that require police, fire, or emergency medical services. And whereas when an emergency occurs, the prompt response of police officers, firefighters, and paramedics is critical to the protection of life and preservation of property, and the safety of our police officers and firefighters is dependent upon the quality and accuracy of information obtained from residents who telephone Little Rock's Emergency Communications Center. And whereas public safety telecommunicators are generally the first contact our residents have with emergency services, and public safety telecommunicators are a vital link for our police officers and firefighters by staying in contact with them via radio, providing them with information, and ensuring their safety. And whereas public safety telecommunicators of the City of Little Rock have used their skills, which have directly aided other agencies as they apprehend criminals, suppress fires, and treat patients. And whereas the City of Little Rock's dispatchers have shown compassion, understanding, and professionalism during the performance of their job in the past year, and whereas the second week of April has been set aside as a time to recognize and give thanks to public safety telecommunicators. Now, therefore, I, Frank Scott Jr., Mayor of the City of Little Rock, Arkansas, do hereby proclaim April 10th through the 16th of the year 2022 as Public Safety Telecommunicators Week. Let's give our team a round of applause. We also have certificates, and I'll read out the names, and then we'll get this to Director Green. Debbie Kimbrough for Dispatcher of the Year. Is Debbie here?
Yes.
Oh,
they're
as
all
I
here.
announce your name, we'll get these to you. Well, actually, I'll come. It'll be easier this way. We just have certificates. Director Green brought actual awards as well. Ms. Debbie Kimbrough, Dispatcher of the Year. Kristen Jackman, Administrative Staff Member of the Year. Charles Lay, Trainer of the Year. Karen Grimm, the Director's Choice Award. Dalton Hill, Call Taker of the Year.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time, for allowing us to publicly acknowledge our telecommunicators. We are typically forgotten. This is a thankless job. No one ever considers us when you think of first responders and public safety professionals. But I appreciate this time you all are taking out to publicly acknowledge our staff. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Director Green. Board members, we have one modification for today's agenda. That's item M1, which is for a public hearing for the issuance of industrial revenue bonds for the project at the Little Rock Port Authority. Board members, are there any questions regarding items 1 through 4?
Mayor,
Director Wright?
resolution number 4, I'd like to know what is included in this 1.4 million for Canis Park.
Sure. Director Couch here.
And why it's costing so much?
And for board members, item number 4, which is in Ward 6, Director Wright's ward, as you all know, as a result of the Arkansas Department of Transportation, when they widened 630 West, they took the historic basketball goals down. I think we all know we've made some significant investments in Canis Park, and one of the historic pieces of Canis Park, in addition to the other advancements, has always been the Canis Park basketball goals. And we made a commitment once they were done with construction to bring the basketball goals back. This is the process to familiarize everyone. Mr. Couch, Director Wright has asked, why is the amount 1.4 million?
And what all is included? It says, and improvements.
Yes, I could answer that. Good evening, City Board, Mayor, Vice Mayor.
Director Couch, if you'll speak a little bit closer to the
Yes, sir.
microphone.
So there are new basketball courts. That's the majority of the project. There's 3 full basketball courts and 1 half. There's also significant improvements in trail infrastructure. So there's a portion of the new Tri-Creek Greenway is included in this, so it connects to the intersection of Rodney Parham and Mississippi there on the intersection, and then brings that into the park. There's also a grant associated with this project, which is a FEMA grant for mitigation of the low water bridge in the park entry. So currently you have to drive through the stream to get into the park. We often have to close the park, the gates, all that would be removed, and there's a new bridge that would be associated with the construction of this project.
So this does not include the bridge that's on the other side at all? And you know there's a pavilion back across that bridge that you can't get to because...
Correct.
And it's trails back there, so this doesn't address any of that at all?
No, ma'am, this is just addressing the entry to the park and the basketball courts and all the trail access and sidewalks into the park and future connections to all that we're planning on for the Tri-Creek Greenway connection in this park.
Okay, I'd like for you to keep the other section in mind. I was quite surprised when I took a tour with one of the residents that was concerned about activity on those trails back there. And we actually started on one side of the interstate, and we walked so far, we ended up coming out by the baseball
Yes,
area.
ma'am. So
And
that,
all of that back in there loops all around, and there's a picnic area back there that nobody can use because you can't get across that low water bridge there.
absolutely. We've done some initial studies with some engineers on proposing what the Tri-Creek Trail connection would be through there. Part of that is a new pedestrian bridge that would go over Rock Creek to make that connection better. And then you would have better access to the pavilion and the rest of Canis Park when that.
Now, would that be a drive bridge or a pedestrian bridge similar to what's in Boyle Park?
Similar to what you find in Boyle Park, yes.
Wooden one, okay.
Well,
Okay.
actually, I would stay away from the wooden because we're having issues with the
Steel.
wooden. It would be a concrete, steel structure, concrete deck.
Okay, I know that this project is very important to the young people that frequented that, so I'm very glad to see that we're doing that. I just had no idea it was going to cost that much. Now, does this 1.4 include the grant monies, or is this strictly coming out of our dollars?
The grant funds are included. I believe it's $187,000 in grant funds, and we have a match of roughly $62,000 on top of that. So that's that portion, and those funds are for the mitigation of the bridge, and that's the first phase of the project. So will be a little disruption, obviously, when we start construction, because we'll have to pull that out and do a little bit of a temporary parking area so that people can still access the park. Just because there's going to be a little bit of a closing of that road for a very brief moment of time.
So where is the rest of the money coming from?
There's short-term financing, and then there's another allocation of additional funding.
And I guess this question would be for Mr. Moore. This is not out of the short-term financing that I had got approved by this board for West Central, is it?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Mr. Couch.
Thank you.
Director Phillips.
Hey, Mayor. Wanted to give a shout out to you and City Manager and Leland for getting this project off the ground. Number of constituents have been looking and asking for this. So I'm happy to see that it happened. The next question they're going to ask me, Mayor, City Manager, and Leland, is how soon can they start playing basketball? So is there any tentative, if this is approved, about how soon before, is there any tentative dates about completion?
Director Couch.
Yes, sir. So there are some contract timeframes. We do have to get through the contract process. So it would be a few months, if not longer than that, depending on the construction. It is a phased project as well. So as soon as the project starts, the entry features, the access to the park and all that is the focus. And then the basketball comes after that. And that's how it's planned for construction. So it would be a little while, but yes, I've received several phone calls, emails from citizens requesting this project. So this is exciting to see that we're at this point today.
Absolutely. Thank y'all for making it happen. And I'm sure people will be excited about having this back available to them. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. And Director Couch, when you get a chance, if you'll just get with communications, once approved by the city board, we'll want to get a communication because Director Phillips and Director Wright are correct. Many people have been asking. We want to make sure we let them know.
Yes, sir.
Director Wyrick.
Mine are on planning and development items.
Thank you, Director Couch.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Are we ready to move to that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I would like a presentation on 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9.
Director Collins, if you would approach, and Director Adcock, are you asking about some of the same ones? Just curious. Same ones.
Mine are too, Mayor, because it says Ward 6, and I want to double check that is still Ward 6.
I wasn't sure about that myself.
I think it is, but I want to be sure because we had some boundary changes there.
Right. Director Peck, are yours with 5 through 9 as well?
No, sir, number 12.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Director Collins, if you'll address items 5 through 9 for Directors Wyrick, Adcock, and Wright.
Okay, well, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the board, a couple of these are tied together. One is the land use plan, which precedes the actual zoning plan. So item 5 and 6 are together, so I'll speak to those as one. And 7 and 8 is together, and I'll speak to those as one. So if we could bring up the zoning map for item 6, that would help show the location. This property is along Canis Road. It's at it's a single-family home property, one of those large tracts home property that's been on Canis for decades as development has happened. Single-family residential has been developed to the south of this. But as you look adjacent to the property, there's also C3, O1 uses and different types of office and commercial uses that have been developing along Canis, as developments come along. But in this section through here, we have actually widened a portion of Canis. This is one of the portions that we took the widening to Gamble, and we widened the north side, would be, of the potentially 5-lane sections, and right now it's sitting at 3, and then we was to remove the rest. So in the future, as some of that development happens, they would be responsible for their portion of that side of the widening if it still can be accomplished with what's being done. So as development is happening along Canis, as you've seen, some of those developments have developed as office, but as you heard me talk about in the past, office development is not what it was 10, 15 years ago. So what the applicant is proposing on this one is to change the land use plan to neighborhood commercial, but also change the zoning plan from quiet office to C3. And do we have a sketch or a land use plan layout for this one? I was trying to see if I can get a buffer in that area, and it's not showing the buffer. But one of the conditions that we did talk about with the developer and also mentioned in the write-up at the Planning Commission was in consideration of what type of development is south of us on that tract of land, the single-family residential. We have been requesting developers to not just provide what we would call that land use buffer or that zoning buffer from residential to commercial, but also look and see what's there and enhance that with lower vegetation, be it also evergreen to do during the wintertime. So that is also a condition that we talked with the developer about that is on there and is in the write-up for the Planning Commission. So the Planning Commission voted on this one, 6-4, 0 nays. There was 4 absent at the time, so we were short. We did have a quorum, but we was at the 6 on the vote. We didn't have anybody speak out at that meeting in opposition.
Can I ask a question about this one?
Yes.
Are you finished?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. What is the difference between suburban office and neighborhood commercial? I noticed on the zoning, you have, I always want to call that southern office, suburban office to the west, that's in the land use, and then to the east, if my directions are right, it's got neighborhood commercial. So what are we getting that would go into neighborhood commercial that is not in suburban office?
Well, you can have some office uses in a neighborhood commercial area. In that suburban office, what we're looking for is, as you're getting further outside the city, you're looking for that larger tract land, stuff that people would use for the larger single-family residential home or tract land home. So we're not looking for even an office retail center. We're looking for single offices. And some of those has happened out there along Canis as the development decades ago started happening. I think there's an attorney's firm just right down the road on the north side of Canis. So that's what we're talking about. We're looking at suburban office. It's that rural nature of it. The office, they could be a tax preparer, attorney, other types of office uses.
Obviously, we're going on the zoning side, we're going from quiet office to C3.
And
So that's a more intensive use, potentially apartments in that C3 usage. I don't know if, I don't know from the zoning map what was next door to this property on either side. I don't remember what it said.
let's bring up that zoning maps up there. C3 is just to the east on that. If we can zoom in a little bit.
Oh, I see it, okay. So that kind of goes with the neighborhood commercial that we were just looking at.
Yes, and I understand, and we've also had comments, and we're working on some of that for the multifamily showing up in C3. But also keep in mind that multifamily, to do the development that would make it viable on a return on a developer's investment. The height of the development, the area of the development is needed to make that multifamily happen. This tract of land, if multifamily ever was chosen in like a C3 use, which they haven't proposed any of these C3 uses, or that is, you still have to have the parking, you still have to have other aspects, and you reduce the size of what is viable building footprint for any type of multifamily. Typically, you want to see acreage of 10 acres plus for multifamily development to really make it viable. You do see it at times that are less than 10 acres, but typically they're phased with other tracts of land or other phases when we see it.
One more question on that. Did, go over the Canis Road improvements. Did you say this is only 3 lanes, or did you say this portion has been widened to 5 lanes?
Well, it was just 2. That was the 2 rural section that we still have on Canis going out west in certain sections. The plan was to have this 5 full lanes section, so a center turn lane and 2 lanes in each direction on Canis through this section. In the widening plans, Public Works contracted with to design and also build a currently viable 3-lane section on that north side, because you have to actually go build a section and keep Canis operational. There's too much traffic on Canis to actually shut down Canis in its entirety. And then in the future, when developments happened or more funding is available, then a full widening out of the remaining lanes of Canis is to happen. So the infrastructure is in place, culverts are in place, crossings are in place, even the inlets, I believe, in some of the locations. Mr. Honeywell might be able to explain a little bit more as far as the location. It's been a while since I've seen that.
There now. There's an existing building there now. Are they required to add additional lanes and infrastructure on Canis?
As far as the boundary street goes, currently, yes. And that's why we left some of it out, is whenever they do it, the bed will be there. So the road bed, the widening, essentially would be there to a portion, to a deal, and the inlets, area inlets, they're converted to area inlets, but some of those improvements are in that we put in with this improvement.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you, so this is a yes or no question.
Okay.
Is he required to do the street improvements with this project?
Yes.
And it's for the length of the property?
Their property.
Okay, that's what I need to know. Okay. I don't know if anybody else has any questions
I
about
do.
that or not, but I'm ready to move to the others.
Director Wright.
Is this Ward 6 or is it Ward 7?
Give me a
I
second.
believe it's Ward 6.
I will look at the updated map. I had it
Because-
open.
As I remember, you took over Spring Valley Manor and Capitol Lakes Estates, but not any of this.
Panther Creek is my boundary, and I don't see it on there.
Yeah.
Or is our boundary?
Partners.
It's opening up. Just give me a second.
Well, that's not always correct. So that's why I wanted to double check.
It is. It is all Ward 6.
Now, my next question, is there any opposition? Has anybody spoke out against this?
We did not receive any yet. I don't have any with me. I'll double check it. Nobody spoke in at the Planning Commission in opposition.
Okay, so, next question. When we allocate the funding to complete the widening from Gamble down, will this be included if we can get the funding?
Well, and that might be a question more for Mr. Honeywell on what
probably is,
he's
you're right.
bidding. I don't know the section that they're bidding west of Gamble for that, but this section is not, it is east of Gamble, so it would not be included in what they're bidding unless they were completing out the southern portion of Canis, and I do not believe that they are.
I believe that, there he is, he can come on up, but I'm pretty sure that the allocation that I had for this, and Lance put in some too, it stopped at Gamble. But I'm wanting to make sure that if we can get the infrastructure dollars to continue it, will the widening include this? So it wouldn't be on the property owner?
That's a potential yes.
Okay,
Part of the reason this was only built to 3 lanes, as far as the pavement surface is concerned, is because of the funding that we had available to get
Right.
a significant length of Canis improved. And then also the traffic, as we go further on west on Canis, the traffic volume tends to drop where a 3-lane section is still adequate at this point, but that doesn't mean in the future it's going to be adequate. We'll need to do that expansion eventually, yes.
okay, okay, that answers my question. So now, how does 7 relate to this?
7 doesn't relate to this one. 7 relates to 8.
7 and
Okay, so it says Ellis Mountain.
Yes, that is way out west, real close to the boundary of our extraterritorial jurisdiction.
Okay, but the other one is Ellis Mountain too, so all of that includes,
Yeah, 7 and 8 is tied together.
okay,
Yeah, that's the Ellis Mountain Planning District, but that is out Lawson Road.
okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a question about that, if I can, 7 and 8. So they're already doing mining at this location, is that correct?
Yes, adjacent to this location.
And the staff and the planning commission passed it to continue to add to the mining that's going on there. I forgot how many acres that is. And it's between Lawson Road and Colonel Glen.
Yeah, if we could bring up the zoning map, I believe that, or even the land use map.
Colonel Glen and Lawson, okay. So is this area, is it destined to be more mining than residential? I mean, is the terrain to the extent that it's not good for residential housing? What is going on in this area that we think it's okay to continue with the mining?
Well, the reason that we felt it was viable to continue with the mining is it is adjacent to the mining. There is material there to continue the mining operation. If the land is, as you go further out west, out Lawson, it does get steeper as it goes into the county through that area, but that doesn't mean that homes are not viable out there, but they definitely are residential low density. One, because of just you're in the county area, you do not have, sanitary sewer for our municipality, so you have to be septic and well-driven if CAW is not out on that roadway. So it still is viable for residential low density, but it is also, that property is also currently adjacent to and being affected by mining. If we were looking to rezone property, just like in industrial and commercial, we would really want some buffer between a mining operation and even residential or commercial or office of some distance. So mining would not be viable for a medium density or high density residential. It, for that location, is there are still large tracts, and you can kind of see some of those placements of the homes out there. They're being impacted right now by that mining operation.
They are.
Yeah, I mean, the mining operation is right there adjacent to them.
Well, it looks like we're extending the mining. I can see that all this to the,
Mhm.
as far as I can see on this map, is mining, and we're getting closer to Colonel Glen Road. What is the access to this location for their mining? I'm sure they're hauling stuff out.
There's still, the access right now is to Lawson, I believe, where they're coming out.
Lawson. What is that little squirrely looking thing that comes off of Colonel Glen and goes down? Is that a road that goes to mining, or what kind of line is that? Looks like there's a lake, and then there's a road that goes from Colonel Glen, or something that goes from Colonel Glen down to another line. Is that a road?
I'll have to look at that and pull the aerials and see who drive out there. I do not believe it's a full-fledged roadway. I've never drove by that property and seen any access from any other roadway than Lawson Road.
Okay, so your access is going to be down here where this Hugh Taylor Road is? Is that the main access, or is this light industrial along or part of the access?
That's part of all that, that light industrial and everything. I believe their access is just to the west.
So the houses that are on Colonel Glenn, what is the distance from this new proposed rezoning to the homes on Colonel Glenn?
I'd have to get that measurement for you and send it to the board.
It looks like it's a little bit, but I'd like to think.
Yeah, when you zoom in that perspective,
100
I'll have to pull a distance.
You what?
We'll pull a distance and label it on the exhibits
Somebody
for you.
work on his microphone. I'm having, the three of us are having trouble hearing.
But I said that I will pull a distance and label it on the maps and the exhibits for you.
Thank you. I think maybe your voice is soft. Maybe that's what it is.
Well, I'll try not to be.
That's loud. I like that. Okay. I don't know if anybody else has any questions on those or not. Item 9. When I looked at the zoning and land use map, I believe that the zoning was suburban office and the zoning was conditional use permit. And we're wanting to change this to a PDC. So if it's already a CUP, what does this PDC do for us different than a CUP?
Well, a conditional use permit is specifically stops at the planning commission. You know, because it does not remove the underlying zoning. So you have like a residential property also has some conditional uses. They can go get approved at the planning commission and operate a different use other than single family. But the underlying zoning is still residential. A planned development changes the zoning. You have to revoke the planned development.
What is the underlying zoning for that?
If pull up the zoning map for it. That'll kind of show everything that's on there. Currently, it's O2 with a conditional use permit applied.
And this is going to PDC, says a convenience store with gas pumps.
Yes, a portion of it, that southeast portion of the property.
We have a lot of these going in all over the city. And that might be a good place for one, 36th Street, Bowman Road. It might be a good use for it. But what does us opening the door for a PDC here, convenience store and gas pumps, do to the other zoning along here? Is that going to say that when somebody else wants to come in and rezone this, it's okay to go to C3?
No, not necessarily. Again, it's the policymakers and what we're looking at. What I would look at is exactly what you spoke about. What this sits on is you're on a minor arterial intersection. So when somebody is looking for development, C4, open display, kind of like a car dealership, outdoor sales equipment like a forklifts, stuff like that, you really want them visible. We really want them on major arterials and expressways so that people can see them. And as you go down in zoning, then that's where you still want them on the larger roads. So a minor arterial would be not uncommon to see a C3 or a C2 use on there, or even office uses at the intersection.
This looks like it's located, first of all, it looks like a lot of vacant land. And then it looks like there's a few houses down a road. And then up above the zoning, it looks like there's some sort of street that goes up into that O2 CUP.
Yes, that is I wouldn't really call it a full-fledged street right now, but that is the location of the planned extension of 36th Street to the west.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right now, if we pulled up the master street plan, anything to the west of Bowman at that location on 36 would be dashed, which means it's planned. So it'd be general location. We could move that location. There's not really a road alignment set. We would want it tied to the intersection and be close to that alignment as you go west, but then after that, it could meander and go more north or more south, depending on topography or development.
Okay, well, like I said, Doris, this was your old area. This is the first time to open up the door, I think, for commercial in this part of.
And we did have one in opposition that showed up at the planning commission to speak against the item.
I'd like to hold this one separate.
Since it's on my border, I support that because it gets kind of fuzzy in there where she goes, stops, and where I start. I know I still have 36th Street, but I'm not clear on Bowman. But this seems like it would impact that farm.
I'm wondering if that's where it was.
Uh-huh, and,
Yeah, the farm is just, you see those houses just right below it to the south? I believe that's right about where their fence starts. And this is the pasture land that's there right before it gets to the creek. And then the main homes is on the south side of that creek on the deal. So
did you hear from them?
I haven't seen anything other than what the individual spoke, and the one that spoke was not those individuals against the item.
Because it's very pastoral through there with that farm there. And then we got that huge multifamily down the street, but there's also a trailer park over there too. So it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah,
I
and
don't
it'd
know
be
if-
probably good too to show on the map if I can get some digital floodplain on there or where the flooding could be, because that creek really limits any future development of that horse farm that we are talking about.
So staff, and you all feel that a gas station right there would be appropriate?
Well, as explained, it is sitting on a minor arterial intersection. Now, granted, it's not built out to that full potential.
No, it's not.
But we are looking for what it could be, and they would be responsible for their half of the boundary streets at that intersection.
So they would have to do some improvements to 36th Street right there.
Yes, they would have to improve. Actually, to do their intersection at 36 going west, they would have to do a little bit more than their half street just to get those turning movements to happen. But they would also improve a portion of Bowman throughout their property.
Director Warwick, I've been trying to get that area improved ever since I've been on the board, and this is the closest we've come to it. But it is sending up red flags because they're talking about a convenience store. And
Well, and I've got another question on this too.
go ahead.
So, and since we've got Mr. Honeywell, the alignment of the roadway, that intersection right there is horrible.
Yes, it is.
There's a AT&T box,
Sitting right
and,
out there.
it looks to me like there might, John, what's Public Works projection? Because what I'm looking at, this is not a good alignment. If they come in and do Half Street, that alignment for the future extension of 36th Street and then the big winding curve, there might be I don't know if we've got future realignment to straighten out Bowman in that section, to come down that hill. You got a big sweeping turn coming down that hill to an intersection that's got some pretty suspect sight distances, and that intersection there at 36th on the east side is not ideal by any means. So, I mean, where was Public Works on this?
I don't know that we had an opposition to this. How the improvements would be made, the exact alignment, what the improvements would be, we haven't gotten into those details with the developer at this point. I do agree that it is a difficult intersection that will to design because of existing utilities, plus topography is also an issue. There have been in the past on Bowman itself, when you refer to the stretch that goes north from this intersection, there's been a lot of discussions about that in the past, especially when the apartment complexes just to the north there were developed, and there was some talk about what road improvements would be done because of those developments. So there has been some looks at how to improve that going north, and then a lot of that includes shallowing that curve, basically pushing the road to the west through that area to straighten that out a little bit.
Because I think there's like a nursery that sits on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, there would definitely be impacts or at least financial increases in cost because of the way you'd have to design that with the cuts into the hillside. As far as extension of 36 to the west, I don't know that that's something that we've looked at in any great detail to this point. So that's something we'd probably work in
I mean,
conjunction with
my
the
understanding
developer.
was 36 going west would eventually connect with Rolling Road, future extension of
I
Rolling Road.
believe that's correct. It extends all the way.
Yeah, it
a good
extends
ways.
all the way west out into the
Yeah.
county.
Of course, as you go west through there,
It gets,
it's
topography
very
gets-
difficult to go that direction with any type of road. because
Mr.
of the
Honeywell,
topography.
several years ago, before, when we were getting ready to do the bonds, your staff did give me a price on improving 36 from Bowman to Shackelford. And I
That's
bel-
going back to the east, yes,
But
yes.
that's a major problem through there, because it's just 2 lanes and it's not built. So you're talking about putting a development right here on the corner, and people leaving there gonna be going back that way. And it's treacherous once you get underneath that bridge. I'm surprised we hadn't had more wrecks. And that Rock Creek Church is over there to the left when you go that way, and it goes back up to Shackelford that takes you to Shackelford Crossings. So this could have a major impact on the traffic patterns in there. And like he said, you got that big utility box sitting there in the middle of the street, which I expressed concern about that. And the developer of those apartments was not required to do anything with that thing sitting there. And I've always been afraid that somebody was gonna hit it. It's inside of a little,
Oh, yes, ma'am, but
but it's horrible looking.
that is also, there's some financial constraints as to what the city is gonna have to pay to relocate all of that. And that is not a inexpensive undertaking to go.
I know,
towards.
but if we allow this zoning approval to go forward, would that not put pressure on the city to have to do something about this? It would seem to me.
I don't know that this particular development is going to cause an increase in traffic that would negatively impact those streets at this time.
Well, I live in the area and I disagree.
Okay.
I travel it every day. So,
It's gonna open the gate up.
yes, it
for
will,
people to come through there.
because they're gonna be going, they got someplace to go now. If you don't live in those apartments now or go to that church, that's not an issue for you. But once people start frequenting a business here, that's gonna change the dynamic. And we're gonna be stuck trying to figure out what to do with this big box sitting out there in the middle of the street. And so I think all of that needs to be considered. Talking to my colleagues, because we're trying to do this millage to do infrastructure, and I don't want to spend a chunk of it on something that we should have fixed years ago, or not allowed this to be done this way, because that is a mess. If you've never seen it, you need to go see this. It's actually quite stunning when you see it. That we have allowed development to allow something like that to be sitting there in a major thoroughfare with all that traffic going up and down Bowman. And people don't travel 36th Street now routinely. If you know not to go that way, you know not to go. But if you live in those apartments or go to that church, you do travel there, and that's a big church. It's not like your little neighborhood church. That's huge. So this is something,
It's kind of like a neighborhood street.
Yeah.
Goes through there. It's not very big.
no, it's not. And I'm telling you, this could be major headaches, Mayor. I mean, it
Thank you.
may seem like a simple thing, but this is not that simple. So
Yes, ma'am.
I got red flags going off all over the place.
I agree, Doris. Thank you.
All right, any more questions for Director Wyrick? If not, we'll go to Director Pett.
Hi, Jamie, and thanks for meeting with me earlier. I'd like a presentation on Resolution 12. And the reason I'm doing this, you all, just to maybe save some time. Staff, this is Mr. Reese again. He's had this project here, and it's changed a little bit, actually considerably, but staff is denying it, and I'd like Jamie to explain why.
Yes, ma'am. The position of the staff and recommendation of the denial just ties to what we feel is a little bit too intense of a development. And I'll explain a little bit some of the key points that we looked at for the intensity. So if we can bring up the sketch and zoom in a little bit. You know, and I'm fully aware, and staff is fully aware, that when a developer buys a piece of land and wants to develop the tract, that they're trying to maximize their profit, you know, return on investment. They're trying to develop as much as they can on the property, pursuant to our codes for that. But this one I felt was a little bit, you know, they're pushing the limits to that development. If you can zoom in right there to the left, one of the aspects is that's closer to Rummel. There's an area that we felt that is shown as being just open space storage. And so they're proposing to utilize that for storage out there. And for us, that's just an area that they could utilize that for something else. For that, they could use it for a part of their detention facility. Depends if they can get the grades there. But just the proximity of Rummel Road to that location, they are trying to maximize out that east side. Another point to bring up is just, if you look at it, they provided, they have reduced some of this. So I'm going to talk about just this one that is on this sketch that's been presented. You'll see that there's a drive-through aisle that goes around. Now, there is a note on there that says that it's no restaurant, but you're still looking at some type of drive-through service. That could be a pharmacy, that could be some other type of, if it's approved, a PCD and allowed, some other type of retail development for that drive-through. We felt more of this property would be a bit more of a benefit to have more of a sit down, not necessarily a drive-through nature to come in at the location. And also, if you look kind of to the north of the property, or the top of that property, if we could zoom into there, you'll see an area that they're listed as a temporary construction easement. But if you look at it, that black line, the dark black line is actually their property line. That's on the north side. And you'll see that they have a retaining wall, or a cut is what they're labeling, a cut field, just adjacent, less than 5 feet on some of the parking stalls, and then it kind of goes away about where the dumpsters are located to the right. And they're looking to hopefully open cut that property. And as explained prior to Director Peck, what that means is they're looking to, based upon what the soil is underneath, be it more rock, to go more vertical in nature. But they're really pushing that to that northern property line, and is going to utilize a easement to grade out if needed. We typically don't support retaining walls that close to the property line that may affect other properties directly, either now or in the future. Just, you know, for a good point is if you try to do a vertical cut, even though you can do that in some aspects, and I'm not going to bring this point out to just bring the size of it, but it's a good example of what you see whenever you expose any type of soil, be it rock or any other nature, is you're going to lose some material over time. It's just a matter of time. So if you're driving on 430, you're looking at all the highway excavation right now where they've done all the cuts for their widening, and it was there previously. The way that rock was layered, you can, you know, go more steeper. You can go 1-to-1, you know, or even steeper to have that, but that does not mean that you're not going to lose material over time. It's the size of the rock, it's how big stone it's in it, and how it was laid. Even with a freeze thaw, they typically put in areas that allows for the rock to fall off and hit and land, even though it is still stable. Now, it depends on the rock, and we don't know that yet for this development. So even as presented, could possibly change. Over time, it could be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now. Some of that will slough off I've seen it on different developments across the nation. We have some of those developments around the city. Just be the nature of how much it sloughs off, how it does that, and how it affects the adjacent property. Typically, we like to see more bound cuts with a retaining wall of some nature than just open cuts or vertical cuts. Because of that reason, at least you have a little bit, a more facade or a protection to that natural wear. So if you zoom out a little bit, they're also proposing 2 separate building or locations. We wasn't really that concerned about the square footages. There was concern of the neighbors of having 2 access drives on Highway 10. I do want to point out that even from the initial development, our comments have been and remain that the access on Rummel is emergency access only. That is the intent to be. That's the only way that we would have even looked at that, and because we believe that it still needs that emergency access due to the uncertainty of the future of what the DOT could propose down Cantrell. Their standard now is to propose a center median in areas, and this has not been guaranteed by them to not be part of that. Their development is not going to go out that far currently, but we can't say that 20 years from now. So that emergency access, we have an opportunity if it goes through and if the board approves it, we have a potential to get that access in now. I would not have to try to get that put in at a later date if the DOT does put in a concrete median, and that is an if. They haven't designed this full section or went to bid. That is just future planning on our part. So that's the items that we had addressed. Like I said, we don't support it because we felt it was just a little bit pushed out and developed out on the tract, a little bit less of a development on this property, we believe would have been more advantageous.
And Jamie, after we met, I drove out there for the second time, and I see now what you're talking about. There's basically a mountain there that it's pretty sheer, and I know they've already done some excavating, so I can certainly understand your hesitation there. And I think, Mr. Reese has made some changes, and I think you've been attempting to guide him to make some changes that would make this acceptable to staff. So I just hope we get there at some point in time.
And I do believe this tract of land needs to be developed. And if you look at the uses, like we've went through several, you and I've went through several of what could we potentially do. And I don't believe this is a good multifamily corner. I don't believe it's a good office corner per se. The reason I say that is we do have vacant office spaces throughout the city. We have vacant office buildings downtown. Speculative office is, in my opinion, we need to look to see if we can fill office space elsewhere first. If somebody's wanting to build office space specifically for an entity, for their office in a location they would like it to be, but I would like to see office space filled up that we do have vacant elsewhere before we support office in other locations readily. So that really leaves commercial or industrial type uses. We definitely don't want industrial, so that's off. So I would think that some type of commercial use is viable at this location. We just need to determine what would be a viable for the developer, for the return on profit, and also looking at what the neighbors are looking at. I don't believe that they would all necessarily agree on every item on there, but I believe there might be a happy median that people could walk away with, not get everything that they want, but actually do something that's beneficial for the area.
I agree. That's my goal. So thank you very much.
Director Adcock, then Director Phillips.
Jamie, on the item 13, have you met with them this week, and what was the outcome?
I have not met with them this week.
Called you?
The engineer did not call me, a representative. I did get a call today from him, but I do not know if it was in regards to this matter or another matter. It was before the meeting, and I was getting ready to get, for this board meeting, agenda meeting, and there was no message left. So I have not had that conversation with them. But I did talk with Director Wyrick earlier. I believe that there is a way that we can look at this, put some conditions on it. I also need to talk to the city attorney's office about what these conditions would entail, and maybe not necessarily be a planned development. But I have not heard anything from the developer.
I would like for us to continue not looking at this until the developers decide to sit down and discuss what everyone can agree upon on this.
And then the board
You-
does have that
you can't.
ability.
You can't do that today. You can do that Tuesday night because you had to defer to a date certain.
Thank you.
Director Phillips.
I got a question on, I guess, number 9, but I had a question first of what Director Adcock just mentioned. Just for clarity, what she was mentioning that would take a vote of the board, correct? A board member couldn't just remove it from the agenda. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, City Attorney. My question to Director Collins about, I think it's number 9, the project out on Cantrell next to Romo Road. You mentioned the cutout and the rocks in the back, and I live out there, so I travel that all the time. Wouldn't that be an issue no matter what's being built there?
It depends on the development, Director Phillips. It certainly, as you try to max out your property and you push the limits to the boundaries to do your minimum landscaping on the topography and your building layout, you would be cutting into certain areas, and this one you are. But how you do that is also a choice. So you could do it in one. We don't necessarily are a proponent of just doing one vertical cut of 25 feet, to also bench cuts, to actually do some type of transition. The issue with having just straight vertical cuts with no other protection is that's why the land alteration ordinance was adopted decades ago. We want that to be covered up, to be vegetated in some manner. To break up the visual looks of it. And again, it depends on the layout of the site, whether you can see it from a roadway or adjacent property, on how that breakup happens. We did change the verbiage of the land alteration about 2 years ago when the board looked at all the development codes to really emphasize a breakup. A breakup can also be vegetation that could also cover a wall or slope to help with that. But in a natural slope, vegetation to cover tends to want to break up that natural slope. It really has to be designed accordingly to what material is in the place.
Understood. And did I hear you correctly that you shared what you're sharing with us about the cuts to the wall, if you will? You shared that with the developer?
Yes, we shared it with the developer, and that was one of the reasons why the construction easement was added to the north of it on adjacent property.
Understood. And I also understand that this project is currently planned office, correct?
It is split. I believe there is a portion that is, are you talking about what they're planning to put in?
No, I'm talking about currently. I understand that I think the majority of it is planned office development, and there's a portion of it that's R2. Is that right?
That's correct.
And are the uses that they're proposing and I'm bringing this up because we talked about this last week with the project out in Southwest Little Rock about the overlap in the potential uses between a C3 and an office. And I think you gave a very clear explanation last week that there's a lot of overlap that in that project out in Southwest Little Rock, that a lot of those office uses are the same uses in C3. And I'm curious, is that are we in the same situation here?
Yeah, what they're looking at conditions is 01, 02, and 03 with some specific commercial uses on this property. But they're requesting 01, 02, 03, and all conditional uses associated with those.
Okay, I think I follow you, and let me just ask it a different way to make sure I absolutely follow you. When I read it, I thought what I read was there are commercial uses that are beyond some of the office uses that they're adding to this, but the majority of the commercial uses are the same as the office uses. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I want to be clear about. All right, thank you, Director Collins. That's all I have, Mayor.
Mayor,
Director Wyatt?
yeah, I took my hand down and put it back up.
Yes, ma'am.
I didn't know if you noticed. Items 13 and 14, Mr. Collins and I did have a conversation, and he was going to send me a list of what uses are available under C3. When I first started talking to Mr. Wiley about this application before he ever did it, we talked about some uses that neither one of us agreed to. And so I thought we could go through and select items that we didn't want to have under C3 and then leave the rest. And so that didn't limit him with what he could do, for his marketing plan. And Mr. Collins says that you can't do that. Well, now he's come up with a different strategy. And what I'd ask him to do was send those uses to me, and I would get with the neighborhood, and they would line through the ones that they thought were objectionable. And maybe we could come to an agreement with the applicant. But I think Mr. Collins said he was waiting on the city attorney to understand if that was possible to do or not. So, Tom, I know it puts you on the spot, but can you answer that today?
What I can answer is that several years ago, we actually amended a statute to permit rezoning with conditions. I think that may have been amended out at some point that I didn't realize. And so we're looking at that. The general answer is if it was a planned development, absolutely. But I want to go back and look at that question about did we totally eliminate our rezoning with conditions?
Okay, so what I'm trying to figure out is should we not go through that process prior to you telling us how to do that? Or should we go ahead and talk to the neighborhood folks and talk to the applicant about these uses prior to the meeting on Tuesday? It's kind of a short turnaround for everybody to look at.
Director Warwick, let me see how I answer this. If we still have the ordinance on rezoning with conditions, then, and the conditions can be to eliminate certain uses, that question has to be fully answered first, and I've got somebody working on that. Assuming that the answer is we still have it, then there's nothing wrong with asking the neighborhood what they think. But unless the applicant actually asks for it.
I get that.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'd be a win-win for everybody.
Right.
I mean, I think that's what Director Campuris was talking about last week. Was it? Yeah, last week. So I guess I'm curious about the timing. How long is it going to take? Pressure's on. How long is it going to take for you to investigate that? And do you have the time to do it before the meeting on Tuesday?
I will.
I will. Okay, so Jamie, if you'll send me that list, then I'll make sure it gets to the neighborhood, and then you're gonna contact the engineer for the applicant.
Yes, I'm gonna
right?
contact the applicant and part of that explanation, and this is more for Mr. Carpenter's knowledge of why I was thinking that is when developers look at speculative zoning, right? They have a tract line that's not developed. To me, a planned development needs to be planned. I mean, you know what you're about to do. You're about to go break ground. You're about to do that. And that's why there's time limitations set. So it's set for 3 years. If you don't get it done, then it is cause for revocation. Doesn't mean we have to, but essentially, if it's not following the path. So it's not really intended for speculative to rezone something to try to sell something. It's not really intended for that. We have used that process in the past. You've seen some come up in the past year that had that type of zoning in it that we said, well, we want it to be all C3 uses and it's a planned development. That was what I was talking about, and to get with Mr. Carpenter is I believe that if we're looking for that more non-developed yet, speculative, where they're looking to rezone it to sell and develop, then a C3 with conditions may be the appropriate use. It's not tying it to a time frame. It is tying it to the sale of the land. It ties to the land, and that way, some land deals take close to that 3 years, if not more, to go through, to market it, try to find it, and sell the land. So it might be more of a rethinking of how the process has been in the past to what we're looking to do to try to accomplish the same manner.
And really, that's what Mr. Wiley and I had talked about before he ever sent his application in. And, I mean, he's a reasonable person. And I think there's a win-win here. I think we can get the neighborhood to look at what their list might be and then his and, maybe submit that. So, if you'll send it to me, then I'll quickly turn it around to the neighborhood and we'll wait on Mr. Carpenter to his
Yes, ma'am.
resolution. Thank you.
Director Adcock. I believe we've gone to 12 through 14. Seeing no more questions from members of the board, I'm going to check again. Seeing no more questions from members of the board, we'll now move to our fourth quarter financial report presented by our Chief Financial Officer, Director Sarah Linehan.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the board, City Manager. Okay. All right. So first, I want to remind you that this is a preliminary report. We have soft closed our books. Our auditors arrive on Monday, and we'll begin the annual audit. And until that's complete, and we still have some annual reports that come in, the land assurance report that determines our waste disposal closure and post-closure. We've got some actuarial reports on our pension plans and a few other things that are still outstanding that could modify these numbers slightly. So first, with our general fund revenues, this is just the percentage of the budget collected. And so we achieved 102.69% of our annual budget. So we exceeded our budget in comparison to 100.3% the same period a year ago. When you look at the dollars, our general fund operating revenues were $226,888,858. The amended budget was $220,936,524, and that compares to $200,911,351 last year. So our general fund revenues were approximately $6 million above the amended budget and approximately $26 million above the same period a year ago. And we'll talk about it by category in a moment, but you'll recall that last year is the year that, beginning in March, we were shut down for quite a bit of the year. On page 4, we'll look at our revenues by category. So our general property taxes exceeded budget by $556,000. When you look at it also in comparison to the same period a year ago, you'll see that it's $3 million more, and that's primarily due to the fact we talked earlier in the year that our excess commissions associated with 2020 came in too late to be recognized as 2020 revenues, so they were included in 2021. Well, this year we got our excess commissions on time, so they are also included in 2021. So both of those amounts are about $1.1 million apiece, so $2.2 million of that variance is simply due to the timing of receipt of excess commissions. The remainder of the variance in the current year compared to last year is the 2.8% growth that we anticipated based on valuations. Our sales tax I'll talk about in detail in just a moment. In total, though, you'll see that we were approximately $4.7 million over our budget. I'll remind you that about $1.4 million of that has to do with that iron and steel mills and ferroalloy that can still be recaptured through June of the current year. The licenses and permits were 0.9% above budget at year end, but the majority of the variance compared to the prior year is associated with the mixed drink supplemental payments. Once the restaurants and bars reopened, the mixed drink supplemental payments, they were 5.2% above budget, and I'll show you the comparison to prior year in just a moment. Our intergovernmental revenues are received annually. Our budget amendment adjusted to the actual that we received in July. Charges for services were 1.9% above budget, primarily due to increased revenue at the zoo. But all of our parks operations, golf, fitness, and parks were all slightly above budget. Fines and fees trailed the amended budget by 2.8%, but they exceeded prior year by over 14%. And the courts did resume activity, but it was remote for a good portion of the year. And of course, there was less tickets issued with the slowdowns that were occurring. Our franchise fees were very close to budget at year end. They exceeded budget by 1%. Oh, excuse me. And our miscellaneous revenues exceeded budget by $104,000. And a large part of that, there was a boiler destroyed at the River Market during the 2021 winter storm, and that reflects an insurance recovery that then was utilized for replacement of the boiler. And that was the variance in the budget. We did not anticipate that. So now we'll look at, compared to the original adopted budget, this is a slide that Director Campuras had asked in the past. So you'll see, compared to the original adopted budget, obviously the variances are much greater, $21.6 million. We amended the budget twice during 2021, once in October and once in December. And the largest impact, well, the overall impact was $15.6 million, but the largest adjustment was to the sales tax revenues, which we increased $13.5 million. When you look at the comparison to prior year, I've already explained the variance in the general property taxes. Again, $2.2 million of that is associated just with the timing of the excess collections that are received annually. The remainder is the 2.8% growth in property taxes, which also includes some additional collection on delinquencies that had occurred the year before. The original charge that we received from the county was 2.17%, but the actual revenues were 2.8% above the prior year. We've already talked a little bit about licenses and permits, but the big variance here is driven by those mixed drink supplemental payments, which increased 54% over the previous year with the reopening of the bars and the restaurants. Charges for services exceeded prior year by approximately $3.5 million. The pandemic forced temporary closures of the zoo, golf courses, parks, and recreation facilities. Those have increased $2.1 million the zoo increased 2.1 million this year over last year. Golf increased almost 300,000 over last year. In addition, the legislative change to 911 fees enabled us to increase the reimbursement that the general fund receives to help offset the 911 salaries by 750,000. So that's part of that variance as well. Our franchise fee revenue is over prior year, and that was driven in a large part by the extremely cold weather and the snow that was experienced in the first quarter of 2021. That increased gas, electricity, water, and wastewater franchise fees. Usage of gas and electricity increased, you know, with heating and that type of thing. But the water and the wastewater increased. People kept their faucets dripping in order to avoid freezing pipes, and that increased both the water and the wastewater utility. Your wastewater is based on average winter usage, so that drove both of those up as well. So when you look at our sales tax slide, this is over the last 12 months, and keep in mind it shows March 20 through March 21, and the month shown is the month that it's collected, but it's revenue for the 2 months prior. This actually shows two years here. So our fourth quarter sales tax receipts that came in December, January 2022, and February 22 for October through December increased 11.64%, 22.7% in November, and 14.22% respectively. The second through the fourth quarter revenues, where you see the really high growth, that's during the period that was the most heavily impacted by COVID in the previous year, so that's over the very suppressed revenues of the previous year. And, you know, also, we really had a hard time last year gauging how much the bill that allowed collection of sales and use tax on internet sales was going to impact the city. And because revenues were suppressed during the pandemic, we weren't seeing the full impact of that. As things have, you know, people are going back to work and their spending increased, which also was impacted by federal stimulus payments that individuals received, as well as the federal government. That spending increased, and we saw some large revenue increases that we did not originally anticipate. Year to date, the city's local sales tax revenue, which is the red bar on the slide, increased 15.09%. Over the prior year, the city's share of the county sales tax increased 15.7%. And then turnback funds also increased 15% from the state. So combined, the blended growth for the year was 15.35%, which was 3.86 above our amended budget. And I'll talk about the NAICS categories in just a moment, but keep in mind, again, 1.4 million approximately of this growth is due to just the iron, steel, and ferroalloy manufacturing, which in the previous year was practically non-existent. So here you just see the blended growth rate over the last 12 months. The bar, the red numbers on the bar show the growth for that month in particular, and the green line is the budget estimate, and then the blue line is the rolling 12 months. So you'll see the rolling 12-month growth was 15.35% above the same period a year ago by year end. So when we did our budget amendments, including the one that we did in December, we adjusted to the actual revenue that had been received through November 2021 for September sales. So you're seeing in the variance column, you see zeros from August through November, which was really the period of January through September. Those first 5 months, the variance is there. That's the portion that relates to that iron, steel, and ferroalloy that we thought might be recaptured for any expenditure over the $2,500 where they can claim that rebate. So we did not adjust the budget for that in anticipation that it might be recalled. The variances that you see on the last 3 months, those are our fourth quarter variances. And If we look back at the trend line, you can see here, it's easier to see on this one. You can see how in that May to July, which is February to March revenues, when the pandemic really was at its fullest, our growth over those periods was really, really high. And then it kind of leveled off around the 10 to 13% range, and we kind of thought it would stay in that area. But in November, which is reflected as January on the graph, collection of revenue, that was the Christmas buying season, and expenditures were much higher than we had anticipated. So again, overall, the growth, the amended budget growth was a little over 11%, but we exceeded that by 4.7 million, and 1.4 of that is that portion we're concerned about being recalled through June of this year. 3.86% above budget and 15.35% above the same period a year ago. So now we'll look at this by the growth categories for NAICS, and this kind of shows you what was going on. That first category was our highest growth category, and this is just the city portion. This doesn't include our share of the county sales, but you'll see that on the 1.5 cent tax, that tax in 2020 was $1,731. This year it was $1,292,000. So it grew over 74,000%. And that it was related primarily to, steel. We think it is likely tied to the I-30 bridge construction and some of the other major economic development projects such as Costco and Amazon. That could still be recalled up to 12 months. Businesses have a lot of time to claim that back. We think by June, if it hasn't been recouped by that time, then we're okay to move forward with planning to expend that if we want to. But until then, we think we need to hold and resist spending those funds. The next categories, you'll see the electronic shopping and mail order houses. That's the increase in internet sales. It grew 24%, but that was down from 38% at the end of the second quarter. So over the year, it was up 24%, but it did decrease as people went back to shopping at their local businesses. Food services, drinking places, full-service restaurants, traveler accommodation, those increased 41.5%, 17%, and 55.5% respectively. And that's reflecting the gradual reopening of the bars and restaurants and the relaxation of the travel restrictions. So you can see that a lot of this does have to do with the suppressed revenues the prior year associated with COVID. County is really same song, second verse, so I won't spend a lot of time here. The only thing is that the iron, steel mills, and ferroalloy fell out of the top 10 of theirs just a little bit, primarily due to they had a large outside of the city limit revenue in 2020 in the second quarter, which is why that dropped out of their top 10. So now we'll look at the revenue that was provided by the 2012 sales tax. And as a reminder, the 3/8 portion of that tax did expire in December. So over the 10-year life of the tax, the revenue generated approximately $510 million in revenue for the city, with about $318.7 million supporting operations and approximately $191.3 million dedicated to capital projects over that 10-year period. In 2021, we had $38.7 million in the operating portion of the tax that contributed to funding the police, fire, code enforcement, parks maintenance, zoo positions, and other operating items that were included in the tax. Approximately $23.2 million was deposited to the 3/8 Capital Projects Fund to support the projects as designated by that resolution 13343. The 2021 tax receipts, if you look to the far right, exceeded 2020 by 15%. And the original forecasted revenue for the capital portion, that 3/8 portion of the tax, was $195,843,000. So that anticipated average growth of 2% a year over the 10-year life of the tax. So at the end, we did make up ground this last year, but that doesn't make up for the compounding of impact had we had that 2% growth per year. So we still fell about 4.5 million shy of the original forecast for the capital tax. But that 97.7%, that's what we collected in comparison to the original estimate. Due to the fact that we took short-term financing notes out in the early period, the first 5 years, to complete primarily public safety projects, we expended 100% of the allocation we anticipated on those projects. So those that were not completed or that waited throughout the period ended up with an overall allocation of about 97%. So that cost them, had we allocated it ratably from the very beginning and not accelerated anything, they all would have received 97.7. But those that were not finished ended up with about 97%. And as we've discussed in the past, we anticipate completing all the projects with the exception of the courts building. And that's one of the items that we'll talk about later when we talk about the bond renewal later this evening. On to franchise fees. So our electric utility franchise fees we estimated would be $13,759,000, which was an increase of 3.4% from the prior year. We ended about $35,000 short of the amended budget, but very close. The gas franchise fees, the amended budget was $3,188,000, which was an increase of 9.5% from 2020 actual results. Those revenues actually exceeded the amended budget by about $86,000, and that's primarily due to the increased cost of natural gas, which is passed on to consumers. And people started seeing those gas rates increase beginning in the fourth quarter. Now we'll move on to our expenditures. So for the year, we expended 98.48% of the annual budget for the general fund in comparison to 98.64% the previous year. For the operating expenditures, we expended $207,547,742 compared to a budget of $210,752,412 and compared to $189 million a year ago. So we were about $3.2 million below budget on our expenditures and about $18.5 million above the prior year. And I'll remind you, included in that $18.5 million is the $5 million adjustment we made to make the contribution for land acquisition at the port. Another big component of this variance is we received the CARES funding that offset, I'm trying to remember exactly how many, but it offset fire salaries, and you'll see that when we look at expenses, the fire expenditures in the current year compared to last year, and a big part of that variance is because of the CARES reimbursement, and we pulled those expenditures out of the general fund and moved them to the grant fund in 2020 for the CARES Act. So now by department, we typically explain any variances that are above $50,000 and 5% of budget. Overall, that $3,204,000 below budget is 1.5% of the budget, so very close in total. We had 6 departments that experienced savings that exceeded 5% of budget and $50,000. The first is community programs. They were below budget by $60,748 at the end of the year. That was primarily due to the resignation of the Racial and Cultural Diversity Program Manager in July, and then that position was later moved to the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in General Administration. The District Court, First Division Criminal Court, their expenditures were below budget $103,626. Personnel cost is the majority of the variance, $74,857, due to 2 vacant positions. Then they also had some savings in supplies for uniforms, office supplies, information systems, and then savings in maintenance and contract expenditures of $19,000. Finance was below budget $226,601, and that was primarily, again, due to the number of vacant positions. We've had 8 to 10 vacant positions for the majority of the year, which generated that savings. Public Works. In the general fund, Public Works represents the Building Services Division. Those expenditures were below budget $63,260, and that was primarily due to savings in utilities. Jim Daly Fitness and Aquatic Center was very slow to reopen. They had were below budget $131,042 at the end of the year. The majority of that is personnel cost, 4 full-time positions, and then also part-time salaries that were delayed when the facility delayed reopening. Fire and police did not meet the variance explanation criteria. They were actually below budget. Fire 1.78% and police just 0.9%. The numbers are larger because their budget's a lot larger. Housing and neighborhood programs expenditures were below budget, $366,600 at year end. At that time, they had 19 vacant positions, which was responsible for the majority of that variance. And then the GFOA standards have asked us, and we have separated debt service for the last couple of years. They've also asked us to separate any capital outlay that comes from the departments in the general fund. And so we have reflected that separately here. There's not a lot of capital expenditures that occur out of the general fund. We typically use our short-term financing, or we used our 3/8 cent funds or bond funds for capital expenditures. But the capital expenditures here, the variance of $73,000 is primarily due to the replacement of that boiler in the river market that we discussed earlier on the revenue side. We got the insurance recovery that offset the cost of replacement. So now we move on to the savings from authorized but unfilled positions. We had achieved our $7 million in vacancy savings before September, and so we quit reducing department budgets to offset that vacancy savings allocation. There were 195 budgeted positions that were unfilled in the general fund at the end of the year. We increased our vacation sick payout budget during our budget amendments to $2,510,172, and that's the amount that we paid out. You see the trend line on our vacant positions, and those have trended up beginning in May. We took a little bit of a dip from November to December, but the 195 vacant positions at year end did include 58 police officers, 5 sergeants, and 1 lieutenant for a total of 64 uniform positions. So in summary, in the general fund, we've talked about line 1 revenues in detail. We've talked about line 2 expenditures in detail. And so you'll see that combined, those contributed revenue of $19,341,000, which was $9,157,000 above our budget. The other financing sources and uses, we had the carryover, which was the health insurance savings that we generated in 2020 that we carried over to 2021 so that employees did not have to pay additional health insurance. We had transfers in, which this is primarily the overhead allocations that we receive from other funds for offices or departments like finance and IT and the city attorney that provides services to all funds. And then transfers out, which funded our special projects, and all of those were right in line with our budget. So net income from all sources was $10,022,006 for the general fund, which was $9,157,000 above our annual budget. As we discussed in our December budget amendment, we were going to increase the restricted reserve by another $1 million to bring it to $12 million using our year-end net income, so we have done that. And that is included in that $37 million ending fund balance, the $12 million of the restricted reserve. For the street fund, and we'll do these just at a high level. The revenues exceeded budget $545,000. That was 2.35% above their budget, and it was primarily attributed to the excess property tax commissions and the increased state turnback funds received for streets and drainage operations. Their expenditures were approximately 10% below budget, so they added $4,190,000 to fund balance, which was $2,463,000 more than the, or $2,493,000 more than the original budget. All of the fund balance in the street fund, we require that there's a 10% fund balance reserve. Best practices is 17%, but we'll talk about that later in the year. The remainder is used for street and drainage projects, and that's all. This is restricted for streets and drainage, cannot be used for other purposes. The waste disposal fund, revenues exceeded budget by $264,000. Operating expenditures were below budget by $609,000. The revenue variance was only 1.1%. The expenditure variance was 2.8% below budget. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we are still waiting on the annual landfill assurance study, which determines our final closure and post-closure cost. And then as an enterprise fund or a business type fund, this fund will also have to be trued up for actuarial calculations associated with pension benefits. And so that will be done in the next month as we're working through our final close and we receive those actuarial reports. So the expenditures could still change some in the waste disposal fund. Our fleet fund revenues were below budget, $762,756. You'll recall that the fleet fund is an internal service fund. The revenues are generated through billing other departments for services that are performed by fleet. Our expenditures were below budget by $627,000, which is the reason the billings and the expenditures were below budget. Two major factors. There were some vacant positions in the fleet fund, so obviously the cost of those positions is not passed on if they're not filled. But also, fuel was actually fairly close to budget. The main savings was in auto parts and contracted repairs where we have to use sublets. And part of that is due to the fleet replacement program that we've been able to maintain with the 3/8 funds, which has reduced the age of the fleet and reduced the need for costly repairs. Overall, the fleet did have a net loss of just over $1 million. A big portion of that was due to the $738,000 transfer that was included in the budget. It was from accumulated fund balance, and it was used to upfit 26 police patrol vehicles, and that was part of the original budget, or the budget amendment, excuse me. The remainder was some major building and land maintenance that was planned during the year, which makes up the remainder of that variance. Our vehicle storage fund, we adjusted revenues up in our budget amendments, and we fell just $12,000 short of that, which is just very insignificant. But our vehicle auction sales were very much higher than in the past due to the increase in vehicles that were available and the resumption of the auction sales. Expenditures were below budget, $164,000, and that was primarily in personnel cost, and then contracted services, primarily towing, utilities, and training. And then finally, our parking garages fund and our operating revenues exceeded budget here by $134,000. Our operating expenditures trailed budget by $120,000. The higher revenues were primarily due to street cut and parking meter revenues, which are dedicated to bond service. The expenditures that are below budget were primarily contracted expenses and utility savings. Our parking revenues did recover somewhat from the prior year, but one of the huge amounts that was in prior year's net income was the street cut revenue was twice what it was in the current year. And a lot of that was due to the build out of fiber throughout the city and what utilities were paying to repair our streets after installing that fiber. So we had anticipated that it would drop in 2021, and it did. And so we're expecting it to kind of maintain where it is now moving forward for regular utility relocations. But overall, the net impact to the parking garage fund, net income of $692,000, which was $257,000 above budget. Our parking revenues, though, for the monthly and the daily parking still trail 2019 revenues. They have not fully recovered yet from the impact of COVID. So in summary, overall, variances from budget were favorable as COVID-19 restrictions were lifted and businesses began to reopen and recover. Charges for services improved significantly over 2020, but still trailed 2019 results in the most heavily impacted by COVID-19. Revenues were enhanced by strong local economic development activity and by the impact of the federal stimulus and recovery payments that were distributed to individuals and businesses. That's one of the reasons why we projected sales tax to stay at the level it was in 2021 for our 2022 budget, less that ferroalloy piece that we didn't expect to recur every year. But we did not grow it significantly over that because a lot of the impact of the stimulus funds also spurred development, and we don't anticipate that continuing to come to individuals. The results presented are preliminary. As I mentioned, we still have some outstanding items, and those will be trued up, and then a final report will be issued upon completion of the 2021 audit. That concludes the financial report.
Sarah, thank you so much to you and your team and the time and attention that you've put forward. It clearly shows that our flat growth budgeting proved to do us very well in the midst of financial and economic uncertainty over the last year. Want to commend the members of the board for passing a flat growth budget in the midst of this. And then when you couple into our city's historic economic growth, to see the very high sales tax growth as well. It clearly shows that Little Rock has been open for business, and we're grateful for it in the midst of all of this uncertainty. And then coupled too with some federal programming as well, and so which has proved us beneficial in times to address things that we wouldn't have been able to address otherwise without the American Rescue Plan Act dollars. And so I think it's time just to commend your team, commend the city board in passing a budget that's been allowed us to experience this positive outlook as we continue to grow forward in our city together. So just want to take time. I know our finance department gets a lot thrown at them, and they do yeoman's work. And so we want to share our appreciation to you and your team, and also want to share appreciation to the city board. This is a great budget outlook for our city, for our residents. So thank you.
I did want to share one other piece of news. Just before I came over tonight, we've been waiting for the results of the GFOA Award for Excellence on our annual report for 2020. And it was delayed somewhat due to backups at GFOA, but we did receive word this afternoon that we have received the Award for Excellence in Financial Reporting for our 2020 audit. So I do want to commend staff. It's been a really difficult year for finance just due to the number of vacant positions and the real challenge that we're having filling those positions with all of the demand in the market overall for accounting and finance positions. So they've worked very, very hard, and they're a good team, and I'm just very proud of their work. So thank you, Mayor.
We are proud of them. Director Wright, then Director Phillips.
Yes, I don't have anything on the budget, Mayor. I did receive communication from a constituent, president of the Barrow Association, who says they were not notified about this development being proposed 36 in Barrow, and that is in their planning district. So they should have been notified about this.
And which item are you referring to?
Item 9.
Item 9. Director Collins, if you're still here, Mr. Moore, if you'll just make sure we follow up on that. Thank you so much, Director Wright.
You're welcome.
And please let them know, we'll get them. Director Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to share appreciation to Sarah and her staff as well to see a budget that's $6 million over our adjusted budget and about $20 million over our original budget. Says a lot about how we operate. And so I just wanted to do what you did and tip my hat, to her and her team, and then to, I guess, the whole Office of Executive Administration. Make sure that the city is running smoothly and above budget. So I just wanted to tip my hat to everyone. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Hines.
I have a question.
Director Miller.
I don't know how to raise my hand, sorry.
Well, we're going to have to teach you, Director.
Yeah.
No.
Have to do that. Couple of questions. When are we going to receive the 2022 budget book?
Director Linehan.
The mayor's office signed the transmittal letter today, and the budget manager is preparing the table of contents and final review, and it should go early next week.
So it's just for my own information, it's just normal that we get the budget in April?
The budget document normally is received 90 days after the board adopts the budget. It was adopted December 21st, so it should have been completed by March 21st. We had to obtain an extension due to resource issues. We were granted an extension. We have until the end of April for completing it, but it will be finished, as I said, next week.
Okay, thank you. And let me understand, when we budget, we budget to a number of staff, right? We budget to how many positions we're going to have in the city.
We budget the full cost of the authorized headcount, but we also budget an offset called vacancy savings, which brings it down to approximately between 95-97% of total budget, to recognize that there will be vacant positions that occur throughout the year where we will not be paying that salary and benefits. If we budgeted at 100% with no vacancy savings, then that $7 million would not be available for other operating expenses.
So we don't budget based on how many employees we have. We budget based on how many employees we allocate for.
On how many you say? For example, there were 694 positions in the police department once we pulled out 911 communications. We budget for all of those officers. The intent is to fill all positions, and we try to maintain full staffing. But again, we recognize that even if we're in a perfect world, if we are fully staffed, and corporations do this as well, they don't budget at 100% because they know there's going to be turnover. So they budget between 95-97% of total payroll cost to get closer to what you anticipate your actual fully staffed budget to cost you.
So our savings is really based on vacancies on a lot of cases.
We budget a targeted amount. We exceeded that this past year. As I said, we hit that $7 million fairly early in the year because we had more vacancies. And that's just the general fund number. There are vacancies in the street fund and the waste disposal fund and others as well. That's included as a net in their personnel cost.
Well, it's tough sometimes to follow along with this because, it just shows we're saving money, but we didn't hire those people anyway. So,
And so those funds were available for programs and for capital expenditures and for other things as well. If we had budgeted at 100%, then we are budgeting to increase fund balance for sure rather than to keep it flat. Because you're never going to have 100% personnel for the entire year. people retire, they change jobs. And in this environment, especially with police and fire, taking, the vetting that has to go in before you can fill a recruit school, that period of time, there is savings there. Now, there's also some overtime, and that's also budgeted.
Yeah, well, it doesn't feel like it's real savings to me, because there were positions that just weren't filled, and then we say that's a savings. And so maybe I have to sit down and I just have to understand this, because it doesn't seem like it starts from zero when you're building a budget. You're starting at these allocated positions. Seems like you would start based on how much you have now, and maybe I don't understand that. That's just how the
Well,
city
but if
budgets.
you only budget, and we can talk about it later, I know we need to get to the bond discussion, but if you only budget for the positions that are currently filled, then you have no budget to fill your vacant police and fire positions. And, we need to budget to fill those positions. The desire is to have those fully staffed.
We hadn't filled those positions anyway.
We were much closer a few years ago, but the pandemic has definitely hard hit all of our departments.
Okay, we'll sit down and have to try to make me understand that. I guess the other thing too is this budget, what you've just gone over, includes the American Rescue Plan money that we'd received.
American Rescue Plan money is in the grant fund, which is not a budgeted operating fund.
So it's not in here anywhere, is it?
No, it is not. And that revenue is only recognized as it's expended on eligible programs. So the net income from American Rescue Plan is only interest income. The rest of the revenue is deferred. It's not allowed to be recognized as income until it's actually expended on eligible programs. And if it's not spent on eligible programs within the required time frame, it has to be returned to the federal government.
We spent some of that money though.
Yes.
Yeah. And
So the revenues and the expenditures match.
Okay, well, I guess I'm gonna have to sit down with you, because I just don't understand totally this budgeting process and using vacancies and calling that savings. It just doesn't, I don't understand it. And so maybe
I'm happy to.
We'll make sure we get you a meeting to understand.
okay, thanks, I appreciate that, because it just doesn't feel like real savings to me. It just feels like we budgeted at X amount of employees, or we didn't feel that, so we show this great savings or this excess that we had. That doesn't feel like real savings.
Well, we could budget at a net number, but if we do, we're reducing our budget for police and fire. That's where the majority of the savings generally occurs, because that's where the largest headcount is. That and public works.
But we didn't fill those positions with police and fire anyway.
We're typically much.
We're
much
91%
closer.
filled, Director Miller. So we pretty much are. So the question is, the goal is to always to be hiring in police and fire. And so right now, we're 91% filled. Basically, when you look at it on a per thousand, Little Rock is somewhere between 2.5 to 2.7 per thousand as far as them officer to 1,000 residents. So national standard somewhere around 1.5, 1.7. So the goal is to always is to get to 100%. Due to attrition, retirements, resignation, things of that nature, you'll never get to 100%. We definitely want it, and if you are at 100%, you may be at 100% on today, then a week later, you can be at 98%.
Yeah, I see that, but when I look at, I look at page 17, and then when I look at variable, the variances, and I look at those favorable variances, that just about all of that can be explained by not having these positions filled. So,
Again, we'll have the CFO show you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Using the budget practice.
Budget 101 city.
Since well, we won't say since which director, but it's been going on for quite some time.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Phillips, is your hand still up? Or is that Director Wright?
Aye.
Director Wright?
My hand was up as well, but I'll defer to Director Wright.
I heard Sarah mention something that made me bring this back up and remind the board of the resolution we passed January 21st for the Targeted Community Development Initiative. She made the statement that the savings, these vacancy savings can be used for programs and other projects. And so I'm asking that we consider allocating some of the funds that we have in savings toward the TCDI, which is what the resolution called for. So when that decision is being made, Mayor, I hope that you all will take that into consideration,
Yes, ma'am.
because I have several projects that people want to see in the area as a part of the TCDI. And right now, we just have that 1 million, but if we're having these savings, then we need to allocate some of it. And Director Miller, I share your confusion. When I first got on the board, I kept hearing all this vacancy savings and all of that, and it's just an accounting mechanism that, as I understand it, because at the time when it was explained to me, I said, well, what's the incentive to fill some of the positions if you know you can get a savings on it at the end of the year? So I've always been kind of confused by that, so I understand. And you being a banker, you probably have more questions than I had, but that was always something that kind of interested me as to how that's done.
Thank you so much, Director Phillips.
Yeah, two things, Mayor, real quick. One, I'd like to second the informal motion the Director Wright said about the use of those savings for targeted community development initiatives. So I support her request in that regard.
Thank
and
you.
Then secondly, you're welcome. Secondly, Director Linehan, I just wanted to make sure something was clear. The ARPA money, when it's not, and I just want to make sure this is clear, until we spend it, it's not included in the budget, correct? Did she leave? I'm sorry.
I'm here. We don't typically adopt a budget for our grant funds. The grant funds can only be expended on the purpose of the grant. And so that's restricted, and it's in a restricted fund for that grant. And it's also subject to a separate single audit for the grant. Anything that is not expended on required grant fund expenditures has to be returned. We fully intend to spend it. You've adopted resolutions to tell us how to spend it, and that's in process. But until it's expended, it's not recognized as revenue. It's recognized as deferred income, which is similar to a liability because it potentially could have to be paid back to the federal government if it's not actually expended. But we've got through 2024 to commit those funds, in 2026 to fully expend them.
And once we expend them, then they go from that account into our actual.
They're in a separate grant fund for all the time. And that 42-page financial report you receive, one of those pages is the ARPA financial statement. And there's another page for other grants.
I understand. I just wanted to make sure it was clear for those watching. Thank you, Director Linehan.
All right, and that is also posted online for the public, the financial statements. And this report will be there tomorrow as well.
Director, let me ask you, those funds would be subject to an audit report too, right?
Oh, yes.
And so is there a partial audit report that would be coming out on the funds that have been spent so far?
The audit is a comprehensive audit over all funds, regardless of the source. So it does every fund of the city, debt service funds, capital improvement funds, grant funds, operating funds. There's additional requirements on those that are budgeted, but it's a comprehensive annual financial report. It's a several hundred-page report, and it'll be issued in June.
Several hundred pages.
Close to, I think it's 300-ish.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Linehan. Mr. Moore?
Mayor, members of the board, as you all are aware, as a result of the vote last week, the city has engaged Stevens Incorporated and Cruz and Associates to help us guide us through the discussion and recommendations on the hopefully upcoming bond election. At this time, we have representatives from the team here, and we'd like to go through the presentation and then talk about some options going forward. So, Ms. Burnett, if you would approach, please.
Thank you very much, City Manager Moore. In front of you, you have some materials that we've prepared. Again, I'm Leanne Burnett, Senior Vice President with Stevens Public Finance. There are representatives from Cruz and Associates, who is the co-underwriter for these potential bonds, and then the Friday Eldridge and Clark Law Firm, who was selected as bond counsel. I'm just going to go through this material first, and then we can discuss any questions or points at the end. The discussion topics include just general bond information, the most recent millage bonds that the city issued, preliminary indications with regard to project funds that can be generated. And so if you'll turn to page 3, for any bond issue that is going to be secured by a tax, state law requires that you have a vote, that the people, the citizens, get to vote on pledging that tax to debt. The property tax or ad valorem bonds, which we have been referring to as millage bonds, that tax would secure the bonds, and the proceeds of the bonds would be used to finance capital improvements of a public nature and economic development projects. So we're talking capital improvements. By law, the bond proceeds cannot be used for operating cost or for your operating budget. A property tax levied is only authorized to repay the bonds. And it's been my experience, we've worked with several cities, municipalities with tax-backed bonds. Citizens like that because they know the projects that will be funded, and the tax sunsets or goes away once the bonds are paid in full. The purpose of the bonds must be designated on the ballot, and the bonds for each purpose must be separately approved by the voters. And this is something your bond counsel can help you determine, what requires a separate, is considered a separate ballot item and what is not. We most recently worked with the city of Cabot, and they had 8 or 9 ballot items, and all of them passed. And it was a sales tax issue, but again, 8 or 9 ballot items. The bonds that the city issues can be taxable or tax exempt. Generally speaking, if you're borrowing money, you want the lowest interest cost, and generally tax-exempt bonds will give you that. But as they say, nothing's free. If you issue tax-exempt bonds, you're subject to the Internal Revenue Code and stipulations associated with that. For example, the bonds have to be for a governmental purpose. So what you're going to use the bond proceeds for must meet the IRS code. And then also, generally speaking, you have to spend the bond proceeds in 3 years. With regard to the last bond millage, if you'll turn to page 4, I've just we've captured on this page your last ballot. And a special election was held on September 11th of 2012. And there were 2 ballot items presented to the people. The first were for street improvement bonds in a maximum principal amount. So the citizens, when they vote for or against this, they are given the maximum amount of bonds that can be issued. So it's not an open checkbook. There is a limitation. In September of 2012, that amount for street improvements was $73,500,000. And then question 2 was for drainage improvements, and that maximum principal amount was $31,500,000. And so the total amount of bonds, both questions passed, and I looked this up, and it was actually over 75% approval in their passage, which is very impressive to some that we've seen in other cities. The total amount of bonds approved was $105 million total. So if only question 1 would have passed and question 2 would have failed, the city would have only been able to issue $73.5 million in bonds, and the only thing you could use those bond proceeds for were the items outlined in question 1 for street improvements. And you can see under the for and against box, it details reconstruction, acquisition, traffic signals, speed calming measures. And so that's where that description gets is very important. And of course, bond counsel can help once you define your projects, how those will read. On page 5, this gives you, these are the numbers. This is what your underwriter loves to do, is give you the numbers. So there were 2 bond issues. So the vote passed in 2012. You had 3 years to spend the money, and so all of the funds could not be spent in 3 years. So there were 2 series of bonds issued. The first in 2013, the total bond amount or the total proceeds was over $60.5 million, and those were allocated $42 million for streets and $18 million for drainage. The stated maturity, these were actually issued as 20-year bonds. The interest rate was a very impressive 2.2%. And then in 2018, 5 years later, the bond proceeds from the first issue were either committed or spent, ready to issue the second series of bonds. Those proceeds were just under $44.5 million for a total of both issues. You see bolded there, $104,995,638. So the amount issued was as close to what the citizens approved as possible, which was $105 million total. The 2018 issue was allocated $30,847,000 to streets and $13.2 million to drainage. Now, the 2018 issue had a stated maturity of 2028, so it was a 10-year stated maturity. The interest rate was 2.62%, and at the time those bonds were issued, so you had all your bonds issued, and the projected payoff was 2023. And of course, the projected payoff takes the debt service, the annual revenues, and gives you when the bond should pay in full and the tax should sunset or go away. So that's the 2 issues that from your last millage. On page 6, we wanted to provide for you, let me make sure I've got the right page numbers here. The projected funds, I know at the last meeting there was discussion about 15, 20, and 25-year bonds. So we thought just for purposes of discussion, how much in project funds could be generated if the stated maturity were those increments, 15, 20, and 25. So you can see the first line there, assuming a 2022 issue date, we assumed a 4% interest rate. So the municipal bond market looks a lot different than it did both in 13 and 18, unfortunately, than if you were to issue this year or today. $163 million in project funds could be generated. The stated term would be 25 years. The projected payoff would be 19 years. If you looked at a 20-year stated maturity, The amount of project funds that could be generated would be $141 million, and the projected payoff would be 16 years. Now, these projected payoff numbers take your most recent revenue numbers. We assume no growth and no decline. Pretty kind of the most conservative way to do that. It generally has worked for us. I think our last projection on your most recent issue, we ended up picking up a year or two because of growth. The third line, the 15-year stated maturity, if you issued one series of bonds, approximately $118 million could be generated with a projected payoff of 13 years. We wanted to show you what happens if you issue the bonds in two series. We see a lot of instances where the funds cannot be expended in 3 years. So we just assumed that you would need $87 million in project funds with the first issuance, and then whatever you could generate with the second issuance. And we used the 15-year stated maturity to provide the example. And you can see that by issuing two series of bonds, approximately 3.5 years apart, you can actually generate, instead of $118 million in project funds with a 15-year stated maturity, with two series of bonds, you can actually generate just over $129 million. The projected payoff went slightly up to 14 years. It's really close. As you all know, property taxes are levied in November, and that's when you determine, but it did go up slightly to 14 years, but you can generate an additional $11 million with two issuances. So as you begin the discussions of the projects to be funded, I believe your city manager had mentioned, $125 million, and you can see that the 15-year or anything over that. We can go out longer. All it does with regard to your stated maturity is it improves what we call your debt service coverage, which is simply for every dollar in debt service that you owe, the coverage is whatever the revenue is over that. So we ran the 15-year at about a 120 debt service coverage. So for every dollar in debt service, we assumed you had revenue of $1.20. On page 7, I know there was a lot of interest in the discussions I've had about the growth in the assessment, because we have seen some great things happen with development in the city of Little Rock. And so this just provides you with information on those increases. And then the other consideration that we always have to look at is your collection rates. And over this time period, collection rates have ranged, and this is collection on property taxes, have ranged from 93 to 98%. And in the last 10 years, that average was 96%. So when we make our revenue estimates, we use historical information on the collection rates and then your 2021 assessed values. On page 8, this gives you just a sample calendar. These things take time, as you all know. I think the discussion is which projects want to be funded, how much in dollars do you want to allocate to these projects? And then, of course, we need to run our numbers to make sure all of that works. And then, ideally, when would you like to see the tax go away? The challenge we have is we don't know the interest rate until the day we price the bonds. And so if the interest rates go up and we're held to a certain firm projected payoff period based on assumptions of revenues, then the project funds are going to decline. So with our clients, typically when we're talking about surplus tax bonds, which these would be, we target project funds with the understanding of what the targeted project or targeted payoff date is, and then we work our numbers and try to achieve that. But it's all, interest rates play a big part. And then, as the calendar shows, the election ordinance for an August election, the ordinance must be filed with the county clerk by May 31st. If the election's held August 9th and it's successful, we could have bonds issued and project funds available by the end of November. That's the general timeline that could be achieved if approved by the voters. City Manager, I'll turn it over to you or entertain any questions. And again, I have the Friday Eldridge and Clark Law Firm here as well.
Just questions from board members?
Director Phillips. Director Phillips.
Yes, I'm sorry, Mayor. Thank you, Leanne, for the presentation. Good to see you and work with you again in a different capacity. I have two questions about the debt service. You mentioned what it would be if we did 15 years. Did you all do any projections for the debt service if it was at 20 or 25?
Yes, we have shown on this page 6, the, and I don't know, do you have access to that? Do I need to? Oh, you sent it to him? Okay. On page 6, we did a single issuance to give you an idea. And you can see for the 20-year stated maturity, it's 141 million. And for 25-year stated maturity, it's 163 million. And at those levels, 4% interest, the 25-year stated term would be payoff projection of 19 years, and the 20-year stated maturity projected payoff of 16 years.
What I'm saying for the ratios that you mentioned for the 15-year, does that change in your calculations for the 20 or 25?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. Yes, they were slightly more than 120. I would say 124, 1.24 times, a little bit more.
And generally speaking, I know you say you don't know the interest rate until we're further along in this process, but just for the sake of discussion and based on your experience, does the interest rate change depending upon the term of the bond?
Yes, depending on the term, yes. Typically, you're riding the yield curve. The longer you go out, the higher the interest rate. Now, that's true for a regular amortizing bond. This one, it's still true to some extent, but you have the projected payoff that kind of complicates the answer to that question. We can run different scenarios. What I envision is once you know the projects you want to fund, we can run the numbers and show you what that looks like.
Okay. Mayor, I think that's all I have for Leanne at this time. Thank you, Leanne.
Thank you.
Director Wright.
Yes, Mayor, I don't have any questions for the bond council. My question is for the city manager, and you can chime in as well. I've been talking to a number of my constituents about this, and I keep getting the consensus among them is that infrastructure is what they are the most concerned about. And they also want to be involved in the process of selecting the streets. They don't want it to be something that's done by staff and then presented to them as these are the streets that we chose. So with that being said, I had requested initially when we began this dialogue that I would like to have at least 2 meetings in Ward 6, one at Northwest Precinct and one at West Central, so that people could come out and voice their opinion after they hear a presentation from either Mr. Moore or yourself or whoever is going to do it, or me, and how this is going to work and what we're actually asking them to do and support. I would feel a lot more comfortable if we could do that. I also think that we need to make sure that information is distributed well in advance of if we decide to go ahead and call this election. So those are my comments at this point. I definitely want those community meetings. People are interested in getting their streets fixed. not hearing any support for municipal building. So, but that's neither here nor there. It's whatever's on the ballot, they can take their choice as if we end up putting it on the ballot that way. But I did want to stress that I do want to have those ward meetings.
Thank you so much. Vice Mayor Hines.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. So my thoughts, one, I understand the impetus for having a special election in August, but I also understand a lot of the folks that I represent are very reluctant to have it as a special election, and on the November ballot may be a better issue for that. That's something we can, I'll be at the mercy of the majority here in the room on that, it looks like. My question is, how do we hedge the interest rate question? Because what we don't want to do, like we have with our sales tax, is projected our sales tax out at a growth rate that we didn't really see till the end of it. I know probably what our current market is, but everything I'm seeing in our financial markets and interest rates, it's that bond rates, interest rates are going higher. We're going to have the Fed probably take 3 rate increases over the next 3 months. That's short-term lending, but it also has an impact on the bond market. So how do we hedge? Do we put a higher number on that? And then if we come in under, I mean, that to me seems like the logical deal. Let's shoot for higher than expected interest rates. And if we come in under when we issue, then we've got some extra funds to be allocated. Is that correct?
Director Hines, I'll tell you the way we typically handle that. Now, the projections we've used were about 25 to 50 basis points above market in these numbers. Okay. But absolutely, to your point, it's a long calendar until we're ready to offer bonds. Generally, what we do is we just extend the maturity or the projected payoff of the bonds in order to spread that, to keep that payment, adjust the payment because of the higher interest rate.
Because I will tell you, voters and our constituents do not understand when we go out and tell them it's going to be X and it changes to Y because we didn't forecast right. And that's a hard pill to swallow it's a hard pill to swallow for me. It's a hard pill to swallow for the folks who are going to vote for this and support it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Director Wright, is your hand still up? Any more questions from the board? Mr. Moore, you want to carry on?
Sure. I appreciate the feedback. And just one comment on Vice Mayor. As you mentioned, you're right about interest rates, and the longer we wait, it potentially could even be higher. And we've thought about that also. So what we'd like to do next Tuesday is to begin to work with our financial team and continue to look at various scenarios. After visiting with them, during the first discussion, or I believe it was the initial discussion, it seemed like the board was leaning toward more of a 15-year type of issue. But as you can see, with a 15-year, if you do it in 2 series, which I would recommend, that's what we did with streets and drainage and in 2012 and 2018. But you see that you actually generate almost $130 million in that scenario. So I guess one of the things that I'd like to just hear now, are there any other projects that are not sort of on that first list of 6 that we want to at least consider as we begin to put percentages around these projects?
I'm sorry, did you say that we're not on that original list of 6?
Correct. And again, some might come off. I mean, but I think we've got to at least begin to put some numbers around them. So, and I believe very clearly I've heard streets and drainage, top of the list. So you will see that those will get the higher percentage. This board voted, if you look at that breakout of streets and drainage in 2012, that was a board vote as far as the percentages. And I think because of the amount of rain we've received over the last 10 years, it might be a different thought about, do we split it up like 70-30 like we did before? But again, that was a part of a board discussion. But are there any things that aren't on the list that we need to add to at least begin to try to look at percentages?
One of the things, I had a chance to last week go look at the 911 center. It has a lot of deferred maintenance in that building. It doesn't have storage. It looks like operators are on top of each other. I don't know if we've really taken a good hard look at that and what it would take to bring that up to, I would say, world-class space, but better space than what they have. And of course, everyone uses 911. And so and going through there, it just looks like they're cramped. And I don't know how that affects anything, but you asked, is there anything else that we may just take a look at?
And we have, Director Miller. I'm not sure you've been out to our fire training academy yet. It is very spacious, and we looked at that site for a lot of different things. It could easily be a updated 911 center. So we've looked at that. We haven't spent a lot of time putting numbers together on that yet, but it is on the priority list.
Thank you.
Director Adcock?
Bruce, I think we have to finish up the commitments we had before. I would like to see us have the courthouse. Do we have any idea of what the cost would be of that? If we're going to look at percentages, I think we need to look at the total cost of the courthouse and what we want to put out the total of this into a courthouse.
And that's what we'll do when we come back with percentages. We'll have some, ballpark numbers. And again, if streets and drainage are the top priority and you're going to generate $130 million in this recommendation, then you just begin to allocate the other amount that would be left. So that's the plan.
What I would like to support is the courthouse and then the fire truck that we need. And then the street and drainage. I think we have to fulfill our promises and commitments as we start looking at what we want to do in percentages. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Adcock. Director Wyatt?
I'm interested in street improvement, drainage improvement, public safety apparatus, which is fire apparatus, and then also I'm interested in police in regards to a new substation and the motor vehicles. I keep saying that, but that never does get added.
Mr. Moore, you want to address?
The challenge with, especially in our environment right now, with building new buildings, like a new police substation, then we have to operate it, and we have to have the officers to operate it. So that's one of the major challenges that we face, and that's why, if you all remember, in 2011, we did a lot of the operating, adding staff with the 5/8 cent, and then with the bond issue, we just did streets and drainage, so capital. And so I hear you loud and clear. I do. I'm not ignoring it at all.
You are.
I'm not. It's just, it really does become, and just like you heard earlier, where we only received 97.6% 7% of the proceeds, but we've been able to do every project except the court building. And I think that's significant, and that's gonna have to be part of our sort of campaign theme is we did everything we said we were gonna do, besides the court building, sorry, judges. But, so I do hear you, it's the operational costs that give me pause.
Well, today, Southwest Precinct serves Doris Wright, and she's what, 5 or 6 blocks from the Northwest Precinct? And I understand that the police officers are already stationed in the area. I mean, I get it. They're not dispatched from either one of those centers, but they're already out there. But it just makes sense that if they're already roving out there, you would save that 20 or 30 or 45 minutes going from the hinterlands out west to the Northwest substation and kind of realign the city where if you live next to the Northwest substation, that's your area reporting. So I think it's kind of like a boomerang effect. If you build Northwest, if you build out west, that helps Northwest and also helps Southwest. And then we've had a challenge with police cars in keeping those maintained and keeping those up and having enough police cars. I just think it's the right thing, and I think it'll sell.
And
If you remember the sales tax we did in 2011, we made commitments to public safety, police and fire. And the West Little Rock people, I think, would buy that. And I understand the challenges with the personnel, but the personnel are already out there roving. I mean, they come back to the substation and they do their change of shift or whatever, reporting, that kind of thing. But Antoine, is he listening? Where he lives, didn't you tell me it was like 30 or 45 minutes to the substation from out where you live? Don't get me
I am
wrong.
listening.
What?
I am listening. I don't think it's that far, but there is a great distance from the nearest fire station from my house. That's correct.
Police station's what I'm talking about.
Oh, police station too. Yeah, the nearest one is the Northwest on,
And
I guess, Canis.
what's the distance or travel time?
I'm from my house. It'd probably take you 15, 17 minutes.
Okay. I might have exaggerated a little bit. I don't really know where he lives. But he's out west. He's out west somewhere. So that's my point with it. You already have the people out there. And we have shortages. I mean, we learned tonight, that I don't know where Sarah's report is, but we have a number of police officers that are budgeted that we need to hire. So it just makes sense to me that we sort of align the territories and make a more efficient use of our police officers. That's just me. It just makes sense to me. What?
It's not just you.
Oh, it's not just me? Okay. I got another vote over there.
I've been saying that from day one.
Director Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to my colleague, Director Wired, about where I stay. Next week, I'll make sure to have some questions about distance from your house to somewhere else, Director Wired, just to make it fair. Seriously, though, I do want to ask
We had a conversation about it.
No, we did. I'm teasing. We're friendly enough to tease one another in public. But I did have some questions about logistics again. I hear, City Manager, I hear you mention that streets and drainage is the priority. I don't think we voted on that, and that may be the priority. It's not my priority. So I don't know how we're going to determine what's the actual priority unless we take a vote. And I give you a reason why. I'm not saying it's not important. It is important. But I went to Nashville, Tennessee recently, and the streets there left a lot to be desired. And when I came back to Little Rock, I realized how good we have it compared to them. And as I was driving around, and you see how big Nashville has become and how many people are moving there and all the cranes and things that are happening, the city is growing, and it's not because they have the best streets. It's because of other issues that are happening in the city, and that's where my heart is. So I just want to state for the record that, again, streets and drainage are important, but they're not my priority. And I don't know how we can determine what our priority is unless we take a vote on that issue. So I'll put that for the city manager to consider on how to determine what is the priority among the board. Secondly, as it relates to projects, I know I submitted a list, and I don't know how detailed we get into this, city manager, because I don't want what happened as it relates to the sales tax that happened with the bond. Things that are important to me will be redoing the River Market Hall. And that doesn't just mean a paint lift or some, engineering changes at the first floor. I'm talking about completely redoing it, making it a 2-story building with an upstairs for restaurants and shops that have rooftop restaurants and bars that overlook the river on one side, overlook Clinton Avenue on the other side. Do we get that specific? Because that's what I want. Also, what I want is some ideas about how to continue to improve the Little Rock Zoo. I know there's some plans in the works to have aquarium-ish activities at the zoo. Do we need to get that specific in the category? Because if so, I would like that to be included as well. And then ultimately, again, for the logistics, I'm still wanting to know how we're going to decide these things for the percentages. When you say the staff is going to get back together and work on the percentages, are we going to be able to vote to say, hey, we don't like those percentages, here's our different percentages? Are we going to be able to vote on the number of years, 15 over 20? I thought I heard you mention that 15 years was a consensus, but again, I don't think we voted on that because 15 is not my consensus, and I could be wrong, and I could be in the minority, and that's fine. But I don't know the logistics of how we get into where we're trying to get to unless we're going to vote on these things. So I know that's a long question and statement, but I'd like to get some response from either the mayor or the city manager.
Yes, sir. And I can't find the page, but as you can see, it's on page 4, but on the ballot, there's an amount that goes with each ballot question. So you all will determine that, and you will determine that. We'll make a recommendation, and this happened before in 2012 when we had just streets and drainage. I came forward and said, let's do it 50-50. I thought that made sense. And the board was very clear that they wanted more in the streets and drainage. And so that will be a policy decision that this board makes. But in order to really begin to put the numbers together, we're going to have to, have a pretty quick decision on just the length of the bond issue. You've got, they presented us with options tonight, but that's what's going to determine how much money each of the areas gets. I mean, there's a big difference in some of these numbers, obviously. But so we'll come up with a process for next Tuesday to at least begin to try to narrow down some of these questions.
So am I hearing you correctly that we will vote next Tuesday on the length of the bonds, whether 15, 20, or 25?
Yeah, I need to obviously visit with our team and the mayor, and then we'll come back. But as you see with the calendar, we're going to have to make some quick decisions. We're going to have 2 community meetings in West Little Rock, in the John Bear area, West Central area, and but in order even to have those meetings, we're going to have to know sort of what the amount is that we're talking about to go into these various projects.
And I agree with you, city manager. We got to make decisions, and I'm completely on board with making decisions. I just want to know what decisions are going to be in front of us to be made, and I would propose that we actually vote on that. And maybe everyone does want 15 years, and I'm the only one. And then it's 9-1, and it's a real easy answer. But I agree with you. Let's vote on it next Tuesday so we'll know how much money we're working with and then go through the allocations. That would be my suggestion.
I concur.
And as it relates to, do we have to get that, and that may be a question for bond counsel in the room, do we need to get as specific as I'm talking about for those projects, or no?
No, I can answer that.
Okay.
And again, you'll see, and this is right off the ballot on page 4. That's exactly how the ballot read.
Yeah, and I understand that, but those are not, individual one-off uses that I'm suggesting. I get, street improvements include those different things, but when you talk about specific things like a, multi-level river market hall, does that have to be included? An aquarium, does that have to be included? That's what, I think those are a little bit different, but if you're telling me they're all the same, and we can just say river market rehab, I want it to be clear what I'm asking for is included.
Yeah, and I think
I don't want to get on the back end of this, and then we say, well, Director Phillips, we did include river market rehab, but we weren't talking about what you were talking about. We were talking about adding a patio cover to the east wing, and that's not what I'm asking for.
I understand.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Mayor.
Director Peck.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Bruce, I guess I'm the only one that likes the 6 categories. I think that the drainage and streets should be number 1. Most of the allocation should be there. We all represent such different parts of the city. Fortunately, Ward 4 doesn't have a lot of those problems, but we have some challenging areas, and Bruce, you know the ones I'm talking about. Director Phillips, I'm on your page more. I would like to be a little more visionary about this. I know nuts and bolts are important, public safety, fire, I agree with all those things, but the people that I've been talking to about this, not just my constituents, but my customers at my day job and sometimes my night job, they want to see more investment in parks. We've got great parks. Some of them are in desperate need of maintenance. The zoo is in desperate need of some maintenance money. These are 2, I think, very important quality of life pieces. I like the economic development part. The courts building, that's a promise we made. That must be part of it. And if these are separate ballot issues, people can vote them up and down. Love the investment in downtown. I don't care what you say, that is the heart and soul of our city. You can say, maybe I go down there once, twice, 50 times a year. A city won't thrive without a healthy, vibrant downtown. It just won't. I think the senior center is still in there, Bruce, right? This building, that's not, I would like to see that piece in there. And it doesn't have to be a lot. Here, it's right here. We just need some programming. But I guess I'm the only one that likes those categories, and we'll discuss on the allocations, and not to disrespect any of you that have more streets and drainage problems than I do, but I would like to cast a broader net and let the people decide. The people I'm talking to want more than just the nuts and bolts. Thank you.
Director Adcock, is your hand still up? Director Warwick, is your hand still up?
Mayor, my hand has been up.
I'm going to come to you. Yes, ma'am. I'm paying attention to how I see it right here. But I'm definitely coming
Next,
to you.
sister. You be next. Okay. I would like to have a meeting in Ward 7 as well. I've got a brand-new area that I know they've got some street issues and drainage issues, and I know we do in my old area in Ward 7, so I'd like to have a public meeting as well. The other thing I would like to request is, and I don't know how difficult it would be, but the Public Works Department gets requests all the time for streets and drainage. And if we could have some sort of report as to the pent-up demand that they have in both those categories. I would like to see that. I think that would be impressive in regards to knowing how important and what the backlog is in the area. And I'd like it separated between streets and drainage and maybe sidewalk, because there's a lot of people that are interested in sidewalks. So if we could have that before we start talking about divvying up the money. I know the last time we did this, we decided to put more in streets than drainage, but we have drainage issues that are, I mean, they're devastating when they occur. They flood people's houses and streets and those kinds of things. So I think we need to think about the areas that we do have the drainage situations. So that would be my wish.
Director Wright?
What are we allocating for economic development? Did I miss that, or is it one of the 6?
We hadn't allocated anything, but it was one of the 6, and it was mainly for port expansion.
That's what I meant. Is it one of the 6?
It is.
Okay. So under the TCDI, we need some economic development money in there to incentivize investment into those targeted areas. So would that be covered under this economic development category?
Well, in the initial presentation, it was for Little Rock Port expansion. So specifically for the port expansion.
Can we not add the TCDI into that, Mayor?
This board can, port expansion specifically for port land, technically, if we want, it's to meet the standard of what you're sharing is what we've already been able to do as funds become available, I believe in the first 5 years of the TCD resolution that you authored. We've already put $1 million there. As we look at our surplus that we're experiencing because of our flat growth strategy, that's something that we plan to bring forward as well, separate and apart from the sales tax. Does not mean that we can't add that to the sales tax. What I'm hearing from the board, and I think
I hadn't finished. I want
but
to add something to that.
I'm trying to answer your question. What I'm hearing from the board is, as board members are adding more things, this board is going to have to consider moving from 15 years to 20 years, because what you're speaking of, Director Wright, is that we would probably need to add a 7th option for TCD. That's what we would vote on. So that's what I'm sharing.
I would be willing to do the 20 years. I think that would get us to where we need to be. But I have a 40-acre site in my ward that I'm trying to get developed, and some economic development money would assist that. That's a huge site. It's in the center of the city, all contiguous land on a basically a major arterial with 35 to 40,000 cars per day, but I can't get any development on it because the city hasn't done anything to assist. It's a big development. It would be a big development. And so that's why I'm asking for some economic development money for TCDI to aid that. That's just, I mean, I don't know what anybody else has, but I know what I got, and I know what I've been trying to get done. So that was the purpose for that. So will you all consider, my colleagues, consider the 20 years and adding something for the TCDI? We all know how important that is to get something going in these targeted areas. And the second thing, Mr. Moore, if you are looking at finishing what we didn't get done, please don't forget the pool at West Central that would be in the parks section. I've got people still asking me about that, and it's something that we have never revisited. But that was a promise in the 2011. And whereas I understand all the specialty things that we want, I don't want people to vote against this because inflation is at a 40-year high, gas prices are high, and the housing market is expected to, you know, do crazy things, and the Fed's getting ready to raise the interest rates, and that's what we were talking about here earlier. So when we have all of these grand schemes, I dream all the time, real big dreams. I think I showed you all some of them. Can't get any traction on any of them, but we don't want to spook people. That's why I want to make sure we have the meetings, everything's explained, everybody has a reason to vote for this. And if you put that municipal building on there and I don't want a municipal building, then I can vote no for that. I'm okay with that.
Separate.
But I want economic development money in it, and I'm willing to do the 20 years to get it. Thank you.
Director Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor. I forgot to add something. As it relates to the logistics for the city manager, next week, will we vote? Well, maybe not next week, but I know we don't have much time based on the calendar presented by the underwriters. When do we decide how the money will be allocated, not only per category, but if I understand this correctly, we also, or at least in the past, have allocated it per ward. So I get what you're saying. Hey, we may have 130 million. I'm just making up numbers, and we're going to divide it 20%, 20%, 10%, 10%, 5, whatever. But how and when do we decide how it's allocated throughout the city?
Director Phillips, I do believe that, and the mayor and I have actually talked a little bit about this, that we're going to have to take some of these Tuesdays and have special call meetings in order to get some of these votes in place. So that's sort of my thought on how we're going to be able to move forward.
So, and again, I hate to be too particular, but so there would be a separate vote among us for not only the allocation among categories, but also whether we're going to divvy it up among the 7 wards or all 10 of us. Am I understanding that correctly?
So what we did in 2012, and there was a lot of discussion initially about putting more money into some of the, it was first started with wards 1 and 2, and then Director Wyrick said, well, I've got issues, streets and drainage, Director Wright, and, so the vote or the recommendation, which became a vote, was we took 10% off the top for citywide projects that might need to be addressed, and then divided the rest of it up by 7. Now, this is a little different, one, because there are other projects. You're not going to divvy up a fire truck by 7. So we'll come up with a strategy on how we do that. But the first thing we got to do is determine the length of the bond, so we can then determine the overall revenue that they would generate.
Okay, I understand that, and I know I've asked this question multiple times, and I want us to get to the point, because I agree with you. We got to make decisions and do them soon so we can have an election if we're shooting for that May 31st deadline. But I think all those are questions that we have to answer as a board. So I'm just trying to get us on that road to answer those questions. And I understand we probably won't all agree, but at some point, 6 of us are going to agree on something and we can move forward. I just want to make sure that that's in front of us and maybe a date certain for us to start voting on things to get this moving forward. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you so much, Director Phillips. Seeing other questions from members of the board. Mr. Moore, do you have any more comments?
No, thank you.
Well, Mayor, I do have a comment about something else if we're ready to move on from this.
Yes, I see your hand.
All right. Checking in with you, Mayor, and the city manager about the board retreat. I understand a few weeks ago, I think it was said that it was going to be discussed at the following internal staff meeting, so I didn't know if there was an update there.
I'm going to look at a site on Thursday with Ashley.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you.
Director Miller?
Thank you, Mayor. I had promised some of my residents to bring this up because they wanted me to talk, at least ask about targeted sort of hot spots when it comes to drag racing and speeding that seems to start on Sunday afternoons or Sunday evenings. And so if I could, and I don't know who could get me a report like that, but certainly around 17th and Broadway and Chester, I'd like to know what's the strategy, because I know we know speeding and drag racing, that type thing happens. I'd like to be able to tell the people who've asked me these questions, yes, we know about it, and we target these areas, and this is what we do.
Yes, we'll get that. Our LRPD leadership is bringing back their targeted street crimes unit for the summer, which they employed this past summer and addressed a lot of that. I believe this past weekend they had 22 interactions where they addressed it this past weekend. So there is a plan in place.
Okay, yeah, as soon as you get the chance
They
to
just
look at that.
when we receive the call, they have to be there when.
I know it's a tough deal, because if they're speeding, they're gone when you get there.
Yeah.
But certainly if there's, that just like you shared with me, I wasn't familiar with the street unit.
Yeah.
And so that type of thing, that's the type of information that I want to be able to share with.
And you're new, that was employed last summer when it creeped up, and so we'll continue it this summer.
Okay.
And there are different checkpoints where throughout the day, beginning now in the summer months, they'll be in certain locations, Broadway's location, Repsman Park, Murray Park, the Colonel Glenn, the Fush Pike areas, and so they're station moving as well.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Director Warwick?
I had mentioned a couple of Tuesdays ago that I thought we needed to look at our permitting process for maintenance issues on homes. And Mr. Collins sent me a list of things that we're challenging our neighborhoods in getting permits for. I'd like to have a policy session to go over those, that information. I think the amount is too low. And I wonder if we're not overreaching in some of the areas that we're requiring permits for. So if we can have a policy meeting and let Mr. Collins outline it for us, maybe we could have some good discussion and make some improvement on that. So if you would kind of put it in a schedule, Mr. Mayor, I would appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am. Just want to make sure, and more hands, no more hands. Meeting adjourned.